Alright, folks, for anybody who's been following my Jimothy Gaming saga recently, you know that Gen 4 OU has been driving me nuts. I think that with more spotlight on the format, people are talking about much more than just Machamp recently, and a lot of the format's flaws that have perhaps been unexplored are rising to the surface. And I am joined today by BKC, who has made a similar video with his suspect experience recently and shares many of my same qualms based on what I listened to yesterday.
Yeah, hey guys. I have a lot of thoughts, when don't I? But I think, all in all, we're moving in a positive direction. I don't know, I hope. Because it seems like, well, Jim, are you familiar with the basic arguments around the whole Machamp thing? Machamp and company, I guess I should say.
Well, Machamp is pretty simple. It hits you and confuses you, which is kind of uncompetitive. I don't know if there's more to it than that, but people want it because it's a stall breaker, or so, like people think it's all right. It's not that broken, which is true. It's not the most broken thing in the world. In my experience, when I was facing it, I did beat it most of the time, to be honest. Like, it wasn't destroying me. But sometimes it does just rob a game by, like, confusing the check, or you can't really switch into it because it confuses everything that comes in. Or there's, like, an annoying 50-50 between going to the Rotom or going to wherever else. I understand the argument against it, and I agree with the argument against having it in the format for sure.
Yeah, basically, we banned Swagger, right? And this is just like a much more actually effective version of Swagger. I don't know why so many people have suddenly started defending Machamp as soon as it got put on the chopping block for an actual test. I mean, I have my theory that people don't actually have a, point of view. They just like being contrarians, because it makes them, feel smarter. But, I can't exactly prove that. Even though I think it's extremely likely. But I can think of no other reason why, Machamp has been so derided for so long, and suddenly it's being defended as, oh, actually it's good for the tier. Give me a break. Especially because the whole stall breaking thing, Machamp is not a good stall breaker. If it gets lucky, then yes, it's a stall breaker, but that's not something you can rely on, This is the ultimate litmus test, because people will talk a big game about a whole variety of things. But once you get into the SPL situation, then all that falls away because everyone wants to win. And so I'll put it this way. If you or your teammate were going into an SPL game, an important one, and you were trying to break stall, and your method of breaking stall was Machamp, people would look at you like, what are you doing? You're just going to hope that you dynamic punch your way through it? That's not something you do consciously. And if you do, then you are taking the less reliable route. So the fact is that people like Machamp Paraspam because it's very simple and it kind of plays itself. And the dice rolls are so favored for you that, it's barely even rolling the dice at a certain point, which kind of speaks to itself. But stall breaker, even if Machamp were a stall breaker, then there are other great stall breakers. There's other better stall breakers by a lot. Machamp, if I'm like thinking of things that mess up stall teams, like just on their own, forget like in conjunction with other things, Machamp is not very high on that list. Simply because, yes, the fact is Machamp can dynamic punch its way through the defensive Hippowdon and Skarmory, which, by the way, is ridiculous. But the fact is, whether or not it does that is not contingent on your positioning or anything. It's just, well, hope I get lucky. So, Machamp the stall breaker. I also am really getting tired of this almost childish dislike of stall, because I thought over time we were supposed to get more and more competitive, but it feels like we've been regressing into this kind of, oh, I just kind of want to play the game, I want to have fun, I want to use my goofy stuff, and stall is the most punishing for that, because you can use your goofy UU Pokemon and be okay against a lot of teams, kinda. But stall will just relentlessly sit on you, mostly because, bulky Pokemon steel types, and they don't really put up with the desire to use whatever junk. So they are that's why, good players rely on stall against worse players, because they're kind of, I don't know anything about actual gaming terminology. Knowledge check, skill check, noob
That's
check,
a good
whatever
term,
it is. Whatever it is. That's generally what stall teams tend to be. But when I was getting into the game, then, like, on a serious level, then like there was no room for complaints of, oh, Scar and Bliss. I mean, people were like, oh man, Stall is really strong, but it wasn't, oh my god, if we ban Salamence, this metagame will be completely dominated by Stall. I mean, it was already good with Salamence around, and Salamence was an amazing stall breaker, but without it, then, oh my god, what do we do? That just did not exist. So I think the more casual competitive direction, I get that Stall is not fun. Okay, like if I was just like messing around playing Pokemon, then I would also not love facing Stall. Actually, no, I personally would. But I recognize that that's a me thing. You know, I like super slow movies. I don't mind playing super slow Pokemon teams. I recognize most people are not going to be like that. But in a tournament setting where you're ostensibly playing to win, that should theoretically fall away. And I realize that you can't actually get people to tier by our principles. You know, people will vote for, I don't know, Diamond and Pearl Garchomp to stay just because they like it, even though they know it's bad for the game. So, this has just been another reminder of how ridiculous tiering debate can be with the defense of Machamp, because it's not a good stall breaker. It just turns the game into RNG. And, you know, the same people who are now arguing for Machamp to be a positive presence in the tier are the same ones who have complained about it forever. And that's what I really take issue with, because it's like, oh, those dumb DPP players and their dumb suspects. Yeah, I know you mentioned that Jirachi feels like the bigger issue, and of course I also agree that Jirachi Ironhead is monstrously stupid. The thing is that a lot of people say, oh, the DPP Council is just, strong arming everything. I would like to make a couple things clear on that regard. Also, I'm not on the DPP Council, so I'm not really benefiting my own image from it. The DPP Council answers to a tiering council above them. Basically, like if the DPP Council tomorrow decided, hey, let's suspect test, I don't know, Flygon, then the tiering council would be like, okay, on what basis? So there's a combination of what the DPP Council thinks and what the general community thinks, and then they have to get it approved by the upper tiering council. This upper tiering council, by the way, is the reason why we have not tested Ironhead, because the DPP council said, hey, we want to get rid of Ironhead, and the tiering council said no.
Yeah, that's the problem.
It
that's the problem, folks,
Yeah.
is they're adhering to these policy rules that...
I
feel like old gen communities should just be able to make their own rules to an extent. Like, I don't know why they're beholden to that.
You would think so, but I don't know. I've had that debate so many times. You know, I also wanted to ban flinch moves 20% and higher, because Gyarados Waterfall is another very, very silly element of the tier. I mean, it's pretty manageable, all things considered, but I'll get into why in a sec. And that was met with, oh no, we don't ban moves, blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, what about Sleep and Freeze Claws? Those literally have the game modded to accommodate them. Oh, well, they're exceptions. They're grandfathered in. We don't do things like that anymore. And it's just all about avoiding complex bans for the sake of policy, which I understand the principle behind, but I think we are getting a little, or not a little, too lost in adhering to the policy when, what happens if the policy is not working?
Yeah,
do you
exactly.
have to change the policy? You have to change the policy, right? But this has been proposed too. I think it was Peng in one of the black and white suspect tests, I think this year, going, hey, should we maybe revisit this policy that's not working, since the policy is supposed to serve the players of the game, and we are not supposed to just adhere to policy above all else? And then the answer was basically, well, the policy is the way it is, and so we'll be continuing with that. And in case you think this is just me being unfair, it's very, very public. That particular exchange was on the forums. So I'm sure if you go into the policy review forum on Smogon, which, by the way, is very entertaining in its own right. Lots of our best debates happen there. And by best, I mean stupidest. Most entertaining. But yeah, the whole Jirachi thing comes from the fact that the DPP Council, like I said, also takes the player base into account. And what that means is that they send out a survey a couple times a year, after major tournaments, before major tournaments. And they take what the player base says into account. So in this particular instance, they always ask, hey, what do you think of Jirachi? What do you think of, I don't know, Breloom, Sleep, Fable? But here they asked, hey, would you ban Jirachi and would you ban Machamp? Just unmistakable. And 50% of the player base said, I would ban Jirachi. Okay, that's a lot. But 76.5% said they would ban Machamp. So also these are qualified players. These are not just asking whoever's on the forums at that time, hey guys, what do you think? People who don't even know that Clefable is a normal type in this gen, or that Steel resists Dark and Ghost, and things like that. Or that Defog doesn't remove hazards, or actually only removes your own hazards at this point. Knockoff isn't buffed. I could go on forever. So it's not asking those kinds of people. It's asking very involved, accomplished DPP players who are familiar with the game on the highest stage. So those are the people who voted for the Machamp thing. So then the people coming in and going, hey, what's with this stupid Machamp suspect, are the people who are not really involved in the tier. And that adds another very obnoxious element to the proceedings when a bunch of people who are saying, hey, I don't play DPP, but what are you guys doing? It's kind of frustrating, because then you have to explain very obvious stuff that's been argued a million times, which has led me to be very frustrated recently, I will admit. But yeah, the demands from non-DP peers to have something explained to them that has been explained many times already, and them just ignoring it and going, what about its usage stats? What about its win rate? Yeah, so the answer to why Machamp and not Jirachi is that more of the qualified player base wanted Machamp by a lot. So people say, oh, but Jirachi's the bigger issue. Well, to that, I would say Jirachi is actually one of the major checks to Machamp. So if you get rid of Jirachi, then Machamp actually becomes a lot scarier. And if you get rid of Machamp first, then you don't really affect the metagame that much as a whole, because Machamp doesn't really contribute anything defensively. Yeah, it checks DD Tar. Suddenly people are acting like this is some sort of irreplaceable trait, like it's fundamental to the fabric of the metagame that Machamp is always there to keep DD Tar in check. Yeah, it takes 1 million from Earthquake, has to keep itself at perfect health. Great check. Not that it isn't a good check, but like the idea that it's some sort of essential glue, or that it's rock solid in this regard, is just ridiculous. So Machamp does not really change much. Machamp going does not change much about the tier. It is a blow to Paraspam teams, of course, but those teams are exactly those that like turning the game into RNG fests. And Jirachi, I mean, look, I still personally would get rid of Jirachi, don't get me wrong. I would also be understanding to the people who don't want to get rid of it, simply because it's a large metagame change. I understand that people think, oh, you ban Jirachi, you got to ban Latias. I don't think you got to ban Latias, at least not immediately. I don't think it would be that drastic a change, but I get that it is a drastic change, especially for an old generation. So the people who are not involved in DPP coming in and saying, where's the Jirachi suspect? Why are you bothering with Machamp? That rubs me the wrong way. Even if I agree that Jirachi needs to be looked at, I am also thinking, well, do you not also want to get rid of Machamp? People will also say, oh, well, Jirachi enables Machamp with paralysis. Often, yes, but if you actually look at the best Jirachi teams being used now, then the most consistent ones are the ones that don't use Jirachi, because they wind up being weak to opposing Jirachi. So Xcal has talked about Heatran and Metagross being used in its place more reliably, and they do a lot of great things. But talk about Machamp not needing Jirachi. What about lead Machamp? It's literally the first Pokemon on the field. It doesn't even have rocks or anything supporting it, and it still messes teams up. So Machamp does not need Jirachi supporting it. Now, if you wanted to extend the thing to, hey, actually paralysis is the root of all this, I would agree. I would throw paralysis out entirely, or make it that you can only paralyze through Thunderbolt or whatever. But unfortunately, that is also definitely not going to happen, again, because of policy. I think paralysis is a really stupid status. I would instate a para clause. I would do something. And if you were to do that, then I would keep Jirachi Ironhead, I would keep Machamp D-Punch, I would keep Gyarados Waterfall. I don't think any of those are issues without paralysis, but paralysis is a fact of the game we have to play with, unfortunately. So yeah, Machamp going first. I mean, even if you would get rid of Jirachi first, then it's like, okay, are you going to just say, hey, player base, qualified player base, I know you, like, over 3/4 of you wanted to ban Machamp, but we decided we're going with Jirachi anyway. It's like, at that point, why are you even surveying the player base? Just go full dictator. Which I'm sure a lot of people would be pleased with. I mean, I think that's what most people think it is already, but it really isn't. Otherwise, we would be... I mean, almost the entire DPP council was pro Ironhead ban. if not the entire DPP Council.
See, I wasn't
to
aware
give
of
you an
that,
idea.
actually.
So
I wasn't aware that they were trying to do that.
That's what I mean. Like, the argument has been had like at least 3 times. I joined earlier this year, not the council, but just the server to make my case for it and like for flinch moves and things. And it just gets shut down. Like, if the DPP Council had their way, we would be playing, or we would at least have tested Iron Headless Jirachi at this point.
It makes me wonder about some of the stuff that's happened in Gen 3, because Gen 3 actually does have quite a few complex bans, and like around Baton Pass specifically, and they've done multiple of them. Like, I think at the moment it's a pretty weird one where you can only pass one source of boosts, and before it was something else. And
yeah, I know that the advanced player base doesn't like the current implementation of Speed Pass with Ninjask, which, I mean, I would have no sympathy for Ninjask being banned. So, but yeah, I've heard, I don't know the details there, but I have heard similar frustrations with why can't we just do this? It's so obviously the best thing for the game. And the answer is the people whose favorite thing is policy. I mean, I'm not trying to rip into them. I know they're just doing their job, blah, blah, blah. You know who else was doing their job? Kidding. But you get the frustration, which is just this adherence to policy above all else. And, even accepting the idea that the policy might not be perfect does not really work because, the policy is the way it is. Therefore, it will continue to be that way. The policy is right because it is the policy and all that.
I do get the adversity to complex bans, because it can be like a slippery slope where if you complex ban literally everything that's a problem, then there's just a million rules, right?
I mean, yeah, of course.
But in some cases, you should do complex bans.
Yeah.
Like, they never do them.
Yeah, like no one is no one is campaigning to unban Salamence, minus Draco Meteor or something stupid like that. I wouldn't even complex ban, honestly. Like, forget Jirachi and Ironhead. Just ban Ironhead straight up if you don't want to make it complex. And I don't care that Scarf Scizor can't use it anymore. Not that it ever did, because Bullet Punch is still better on Scarf Scizor. But, I mean, even if it was a crushing blow to Scarf Scizor's viability, I would make that sacrifice. Anyone who cares about Deep should. So, the problem with Jirachi, Machamp, and Gyarados is not that they're the most... to bring it back to the usage stats and win rate, it's not that they're the most reliable thing in the world, because, again, when you rely purely on RNG, then that's going to happen. But, I mean, you could make the same case for something like Moody, or
like Bright Powder.
Draw a very drastic parallel. Sorry?
Bright Powder or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Which, it's not good to run. It's literally a waste of a slot, but it just...
because Bright Powder... Yeah, like, a lot of time Bright Powder and Quick Claw will be wastes, but they will also just give you luck opportunities that I don't think should be rewarded because they're not smart uses of RNG. Like, if someone makes use of, I don't know, like someone fishes for Ice Beam freeze over the course of a longer game, and you put yourself in that position to get that one freeze, then, I mean, there's skill expressed in that. But generally, things like Bright Powder and Quick Claw, they're just prayer. Or Moody, or to draw a very drastic parallel, Oko moves. Now, I know people hear that and analogies go out the window and they go, well, Oko, Paralysis isn't as bad as Oko moves. I'm not saying it is. So please just keep in mind that Landorus Incarnate is not as broken as Primal Groudon. But Landorus Incarnate is still uber. So in that sense, yes, Paralysis is not, or the flinch moves, all this stuff we're talking about. No, it's not as bad as Oko moves. But in the same way that Oko moves turn the game into just, well, hope this works, then they dumb the game down in that sense. To draw another comparison that's not quite RNG, but still very, very unreliable because of the whole matchup aspect, is Baton Pass. Now, nobody is going to make a case for Baton Pass's huge usage stats or win rate, but they are going to... The same arguments popped up for Baton Pass. Oh, why isn't it used all the time? Why isn't it, dominating tournaments?
Oh, in the days of Mr. Mime Pass and stuff, yeah, I heard those. It's...
Yeah. And even before that, then, across every other generation, you heard that over and over. Now, there's not a good player at all who would unban Baton Pass. But, people are reactionary and they fear change and all this other sociological stuff that I would love to get into, but it's not really our subject here. But yeah, the point is that people will always protest these kinds of bans, no matter how obvious. I mean, it can be Baton Pass, it can be something crazy broken like Aegislash or Genesect, and people will go, you know what? It's actually, oh, it can be skillful to click King's Shield and then whatever the hell. Yeah. So the problem isn't that Machamp has a lot of usage or win rate. It's when it does pop up, it dumbs the game down and it gets bailed for it. You know, if you make a bad move, theoretically, then you should get punished for it, right? Now, like, let's take, if I have Heatran against a full health T-Tar, and I just click Fire Blast, just because I'm going for the burn, you know, I will very rarely get that burn. You know, it's not something that can be rewarded. Yes, sometimes I will get that burn, and Pokemon will reward me for being an idiot, even though I had better moves. I'm not talking like desperation, oh, my only chance is a burn. No, I'm talking just straight up, turn 1, Heatran versus T-Tar, I'm going to burn this thing with Fire Blast. Or, you know, going for a crit, you know, just on a random turn, even though you have better moves. So those do not get rewarded regularly. The problem with Machamp and Jirachi and even Gyarados is that they do get rewarded regularly. Machamp dynamic punches pretty much everything. You can't just use Ghost because Gengar gets O-Code and doesn't come close to O-Coding back. Rotom offensively gets O-Code, doesn't come close to O-Coding back. Defensively isn't exactly rock solid either. Machamp's often got Lum for Will-O-Wisp. It's messy. And a lot of teams don't have Ghosts. And if there's no Ghost around, you dynamic punch literally everything. And I don't mean you just spam dynamic punch every single turn, although you can. Like if you dynamic punch a Hippowdon, then yeah, you want to ice punch after so you're not running out. But if you think the opponent might switch out, you just keep clicking D-punch, and you will probably get rewarded either way. And you can't just pivot around Machamp forever is the thing, because it synergizes very well with rocks, and it hits hard. For all the complaints about Jirachi Ironhead, at least it can't flinch you on the switch, and it's comparatively weak. You know, base 100 attack, 80 base power move. Machamp is 130 base attack with a 100 base power move, and a secondary effect that happens on the switch. So pivoting around it is an absolute nightmare. Also, its answers are much, you know, things like flying types are much more vulnerable to Stealth Rock than something like, I don't know, Magnezone for Jirachi, or Empoleon, you know, or Swampert, something really bulky. Again, I'm not really defending Jirachi here, because Jirachi also does really stupid stuff with Fire Punch. But just to get an idea of why the player base, in addition to the whole it doesn't upheave the metagame idea, but why the player base is more immediately frustrated with Machamp. You can tackle Jirachi after, but Machamp is kind of, if people say, oh, this won't even affect the metagame that much. Yes, exactly. You're not trying to upheave the entire metagame. You know, people will say things like, I mean, it's a whole mess of contradictory nonsense. But it's like, oh, you know, DPP has been around forever, therefore it can't be a problem now. Give me a break. People were complaining about this thing 15 years ago. And then stupid stuff like, oh, we'll leave the metagame as it is. Also, ban Jirachi, this thing makes it into a joke. It's not a very cohesive train of thought. And it's just kind of generally coming from a place of, I want to feel superior to the dumb DPP player base and their dumb attempts to make their metagame better. What are they possibly thinking? Even though I don't understand the metagame. So I'm not accusing you of this, by the way, just in case that was very clear. I'm mostly thinking of the various nonsense I've seen on Discord and the suspect test thread.
I think some people misinterpreted what I said as that kind of argument. I was kind of kidding. Like, I made that post on Jimothy Gaming, like, just furious about my experience playing Gen 4. And I said, like, you know what? Bring back Garchomp. Bring back Swag. I was kidding, folks. I don't actually want them to bring back Garchomp.
No, because I agree that the experience on the ladder is kind of agonizing, because like the thing with Machamp, Jirachi, and Gyarados, who are often paired together, even if they're not optimal, the thing is, the people using these teams, they don't care that they're not optimal, because their style of gaming is just, I'm going to play the odds and hope I get bailed out. And because the odds are so high, they regularly get bailed out. And at that point, I mean, you can, I've said this before, but just to reiterate it, at that point, I don't even know if the argument is they're getting rewarded too much, you know, this is just uncompetitive, or, you know, on the other hand, like, the odds are so low for me that isn't even surprising. You know, like when Machamp dynamic punches through a paralyzed Pokemon, when Jirachi Ironheads through a paralyzed Pokemon, when sub DD T-Wave Gara solos like a Suicune or something with HP Electric, then, you know, the odds aren't even that low. And at that point, are we calling it can ruin a game because of the odds? Or are we just saying this thing works too often and the counterplay is too limited, therefore it's just broken? Either way you look at it, I think they're functionally two sides of the same coin. I think they're really negative. The whole point is that, and you see this a lot on the ladder, of course, is that you can tell, you can say, look, when you try to stall break with Machamp against Hippowdon or Skarmory, you are not relying on your own play for that. You are hoping you get a lot of coin flips. Conversely, also worth mentioning that just because you dodge one confusion against Machamp doesn't mean you're out of the water. So, but yeah, you can say, look, Jirachi is not a reliable, way to break through Hippowdon. Machamp is not a reliable way to break through Hippowdon. Gyarados is not a reliable way to break through Skarmory, And then the people using them will just say, okay, and then they're going to use it anyway. And because the options for dealing with these Pokemon are just so limited, then kind of will just go down to a dice roll. If they want to turn the game into RNG, they will, and they will be rewarded too much for it. That's the problem. It's like arguments of, it's not even that good or whatever, they completely miss the point. This is not like Mega Rayquaza outspeeding and OHKOing everything. This is just often being rewarded for clicking the button no matter what. And when I say dumbing the game down, I'm not saying that you can never click a resisted move into a Pokemon. Depending on the, to use an advanced example, like if you have Aerodactyl against a Salamence, it could be perfectly logical to use Earthquake, depending on a lot of things in the game, right? But with these moves, the Deep Punch, Iron Head, Waterfall trio, then a lot of the time it's just, you know what, I'm going for it and I hope it works no matter what I'm facing. The team I gave you that I got my voting requirements with, I used it because it has Sand and Nidoqueen and T-Spike, so it's very well prepared for Machamp. And it did well against Machamp, that's why I used it. But there were some games where I was just, completely, or not completely at the mercy of Dynamic Punch, simply because that team in particular is so overloaded against it, so redundant. But not every team is going to be like that. Not every team can afford, forget Nidoqueen, but like all the other anti-Machamp stuff I have it tooled with. So it makes overt demands on you to really safe against it. And even those overt demands, when you plug your team full of Nidoqueen or whatever, then it's still not guaranteed. I had this happen at least 3 times, I think more, where I had someone's Machamp staring down my full health Nidoqueen, and they just clicked Dynamic Punch. That is not a good move in almost ever, especially because Nidoqueen's Poison Point punishes Machamp's moves. But they didn't get poisoned, and I got fully confused. And then I'm just like, well, time to pray. Yeah, that's basically what it is. No matter what you have, they will just click Dynamic Punch and hope for the best. This was really ridiculous. On another account, I was using a team with lead Skarmory, and I had a Jirachi lead whose first instinct was just to start clicking Iron Head. Yeah, and obviously that's one of the dumbest things you can do, but that's just what people do. And Jirachi will 10-hit KO you or whatever. And if you allow these things to run rampant, then they do dumb the game down, and people will take advantage of them, even if it's not optimal. These same people who go, "Oh, it's not even that good, doesn't even get used that much." Yeah, but it's not supposed to. I feel like I'm repeating myself, so I'll stop there. I hope I made it clear.
Yeah, I think most people who play Gen 4 would agree that Machamp going is fine and won't impact things that much and would be a positive change. That's what my attitude was going into it, because I have some experience playing Gen 4 and wanting to learn it and having frustrations against Machamp, so I was like, nice, they're finally doing it. But what I found is I'm going into this suspect ladder, I want to be a part of this thing, and I've now discovered that my issues with this metagame extend far beyond just Machamp, and in fact Machamp is kind of a minor part of it. And it's like the whole thing is rotten to the core. I feel like it's all messed up. The fact that Jirachi is the number one centerpiece of the metagame, it's the central Pokemon, and 50% of the people who play want it to not be in the format. I think that's crazy. Imagine if people said that about Tyranitar in Gen 3 or something, or Clefable in Gen 6. It's an insane stat that half the player base hates the central Pokemon.
Which is why, I do think it'll be looked at some point, like after SPL or something. But at the same time, 50% want that gone, but over 76 want Machamp gone.
That's more of it's like in Gen 5, they suspect Cloyster. Even though, I don't know if Cloyster's the biggest problem, but everyone just agrees that Cloyster is a problem. So that as long as everyone can agree.
That's a great comparison. It's the same idea. It pretty much just exists to cheese or I mean, Cloyster was the same exact thing where it's like, is this cheese or is it just too good? Because you could say, oh, it's only preying on these teams, and then it's like, actually, this thing is impossible to counter because, well, Cloyster, it wasn't RNG, it was just, just too powerful. But with
It's like
Machamp, it's
matchup
basically the same thing.
RNG, you could
But yeah, I
argue.
mean, the Jirachi thing, I completely agree with, which is why, I was an advocate for an Ironhead ban, and then the unending wall of bureaucracy kind of snuffed
I
that
mean,
one out for
the
a
real
while.
answer is they should just let us do a complex ban of some, or I don't know. Would it be against policy to do like a flinch clause of some sort, like you're suggesting?
Well, if you change mechanics, then yeah, you can't do that. Like, I really doubt we would get away with a para clause or a flinch clause. But like, what you do is just remove flinch from in the first place. All that. Whenever someone says, "Oh, you have to be faster," and it has to, it's like that's just being purposely ignorant of how it works because I don't know, you want to get involved and you want to feel superior. I keep coming back to that point because I can't stress enough how if you look at that Machamp suspect test thread, all the people who do not play, who could not have a conversation with you about DPP, because anyone can click buttons and Machamp their way to victory, but that doesn't mean you understand the tier. And then saying, "Oh, this is how it should be," like that's I'm really, really on edge because of that. But yeah, the Jirachi thing, I agree. You don't even make it complex like Ironhead plus Jirachi or Serene Grace plus Ironhead.
When I say clause, I don't mean like a mod or anything. I mean the same way evasion clause is a clause where all the evasion moves are banned. What if you just ban all the flinch moves?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, I wouldn't even go that far. I don't think there's any reason to remove Ice Fang, for example.
Right. You said 20% or above, didn't you?
20% and higher, yeah. We lose Sky Attack, oh well. I mean, if you want to preserve Sky Attack, you say, one turn flinch moves 20% or higher. I don't see an issue with that. That's just, all of these are banned. There's not like, oh, you can use it, but not with this Pokemon, and your opponent can use it as long as it's not with this Pokemon. None of that, Excadrill on Rain is fine, but not on Sand nonsense. Yeah, no need to be complex, just a straight up ban. But then you get met with the whole, oh, we actually only ban Pokemon if we can help it. And then you get into, well, can't we help it? And then it's like, oh, well, the rules are the way they are. We've decided we would. You are allowed to do a Jirachi suspect test. You are not allowed to do Ironhead. That's how it went down. So anyone who is furious about Jirachi, Ironhead still being in the tier, which is very valid to be clear, your issue is not with the DPP Council because they, more than anyone else, would be thrilled if we could just get rid of Ironhead. Yeah. So if you want to go do some digging in policy review, like even the thread Deep Blue Sea posted recently, like, hey guys, we've been discussing this in the council. We want to discuss things like Jirachi and Latias and Clefable and Sleep, which by the way, I'd be jazzed if we got rid of Sleep too, but I don't feel as strongly about that. But yeah, and then ultimately people went, hey, we were complaining about Machamp earlier this year. Where did that go? And then the survey went out, and we got these numbers: 50% Jirachi, 76.5 Machamp, and here we are. So, I mean, people saying, "Oh, well, Machamp, the bigger issue is Jirachi." It's like, yes, okay, sure. Even if that's true, like, would you not still want to improve the tier? Like, is a marginal change? It would be more than a marginal change, by the way. But is a marginal change not better than no change about this tier that has been joked about for this element for so long? Like, I really don't get how we can go from, oh, haha, Machamp Paraspam ruins this tier to, what the hell, why are you guys trying to get rid of Machamp? Actually, it's good for the tier. Actually, it's this and that and the other thing. I'm at my wit's end trying to be reasonable when clearly reason is not really a factor in this, but it pretends like it is. So you kind of get tricked into thinking, oh, I can, argue and persuade and logic my way through this one. But it's kind of like facing Machamp. Yeah.
But I also, I found Gyarados even worse than Machamp, in my opinion. Because what the thing about Gyarados is, like, it's way better than Machamp in a blanket sense, even if it's not getting any flinches off Waterfall. It's just a good Pokemon that dances up. It's got great typing. It has, like, great coverage, bunch of different items that all work well on it and stuff. But then, like, I don't think that there's anything that checks Waterfall plus its other coverage well enough to a point where most games you have to just take a big Waterfall and strike it back, or you have to go to a speed check, like a Scarfer that's faster, and hit it. And then
you get Thunder Wave, yeah.
So yeah, sometimes they Thunder Wave you or just hit you with Waterfall, and you're getting Sand Chipped, Rock Chipped, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand. Like, first of all, there are a couple of like resilient Garrett checks. Like, if you're running defensive Celebi, then I would be really surprised if Garrett broke through it. But it's kind of missing the point, you know. It's like saying, "Oh, well, lefty's Empoleon is a really good Jirachi counter." It's like, yeah, that kind of misses the point.
Well, it's like
Yeah,
how
for the
in
most
Gen
part,
3, you know, like if you're running something that gets slide flinched by Tar, it's almost your fault because there's so many good mons that have rock resist. Like, it's like,
yeah,
you know, Melodic
yeah.
getting
But here it's
flinched.
a little different. Here it's a little different because the options aren't as resilient.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
when you pair it with the issue is when you pair it with T Wave. You know, if T-Tar could paralyze Swampert and Flygon and Claydol, then I'm sure we would see a lot more attempts in that regard. God, I hope Body Slam Jirachi might be the future. No, ignore that. But the point is that Gara is not. It's not. The Gara is not an issue in and of itself, really. The issue arises when people decide I'm going to flinch everything in sight as their go-to plan. Because a good Gyarados player wielding Gyarados is using it because it's strong, because of its typing and Intimidate and all this great stuff.
It just naturally
And
leads to
the
flinches happening, I feel like, a lot of the time.
yeah, well, it shouldn't, because let's say you have a DD Garrett against a full health Zapdos, and most of the time, if you're attacking it, you shouldn't be. You should just be trying to KO it, like with Ice Fang or even Stone Edge. Um, and with Waterfall, you're only going for that. You should only be going for that flinch out of desperation. So most of the time, a good Gyarados player is just using it for its power. And yes, the flinch coming as a byproduct is going to happen sometimes, but that happens, I find, much more rarely if the player is not playing with the goal to just flinch everything. Because that's not reliable. It's like Machamp D-Punch, but a lot less, less than half as likely to occur. The problem is when people see these odds and they decide, you know what, that's my game plan, because it simplifies the game. You know, why do you have to worry about thinking 5 turns ahead when you can just kind of go for it? And oh, it didn't work out. Oh well, nothing I could do. You know, so when they decide I'm going to T-Wave and Waterfall everything and spam sub alongside it, that's when you start having an issue. Not because it's necessarily going to counter everything in the world, but because they are going to beat things that they really shouldn't be beating just through luck. And because the luck, again, you know, oh, well, if it can beat it through luck, is it really that good a counter? Well, by that measurement, then there's not really a good counter to anything, you know? People say things like, oh, don't switch your Swampert into Jirachi Fire Punch because you might get burned. And it's like, okay, well, what am I supposed to switch into Jirachi Fire Punch at this point? Is every team supposed to pack Heatran? So, yes, you have to play around RNG to an extent. I think Gyarados Waterfall that is not actively fished for is fine. The problem is that people do actively fish for it, and that's where the issue comes in. Because you can say, hey, you know it's not reliable to flinch your way through whatever, right? And they'll say, okay, and then they'll just do it anyway. So, or they'll try to. Gyarados has Aqua Tail as a replacement, which actually hits harder than Waterfall. And I swear, if I see one more person go, oh, well, it's a different kind of RNG because it can miss. Like, yeah, so can Ladio's Draco Meteor. Misses just as commonly. That doesn't hold it back at all. I would much rather that than deal with the I'm going to T-Wave and sub and flinch through everything factor. Like 90% is still very good. I mean, Metagross Meteor Mash is less accurate than that, if I remember. It doesn't become 90 until Gen 6, so it's 85
It's 85
before?
in Gen 3, yeah, and 20% raise chance.
Yeah, so Metagross gets by just fine. You know, Gyarados would be okay. Gyarados, I used Aqua Tail Gyarados a long time ago just because of the power. You know, so yeah, that is a complete non-argument. Like, oh, it'll be ruined because of no, it wouldn't. That's the kind of argument I mean when I talk about, you know, people who barely know the tier who are just kind of saying things. So no, we would be fine in that regard. Like, my ideal is to get rid of paralysis. Failing that, my ideal is to get rid of 20% higher flinch moves that go off in one turn. So I guess we lose Zen Head, but you know what? That go off in one turn or have perfect accuracy if you want to keep Zen Headbutt on Jirachi and even Metagross. Metagross is a very good Zen Headbutt user. But yeah, Zen Headbutt Jirachi gets walled by, you know, T-Tar. And yeah, it's just generally less reliable. Imperfect accuracy for one. So Yeah, I think it has less PP too, although I might be misremembering that, but it doesn't even matter. Point being, I would get rid of 20% higher flinch moves. If you have to get rid of all of them, get rid of all of them. Not just the ones that go off in one turn or have perfect accuracy. So if we have to lose Sky Attack and send Headbutt, so be it. And I would get rid of Dynamic Punch, and then you can keep Jirachi, you can keep Gyarados, you can keep Machamp. I think Bulk Up Guts Machamp is a perfectly fine Pokemon. If people want to use Hariyama instead, that's up to them. But seeing as those are not options given to us, then you got to make do with the Machamp ban. And yeah, so be it. I don't think that there are really good arguments against it. I have not seen any yet because they don't really address the fundamental issue of how it turns the game into RNG. And I don't understand this insistence on keeping RNG. Obviously, we cannot get rid of all RNG. I accept that. But the egregious RNG, which Machamp clearly is, and suddenly acting like it's some sort of healthy punish to greedy teams, like Breloom doesn't do the exact same thing, but more reliably. Breloom is just as strong, has much better typing, has secondary stab, has a much better move pool. It's got Swords Dance, for God's sake. It has more longevity. It has more opportunity to switch in. It doesn't fear status at all. Which Breloom is a much more reliable way of breaking stall or breaking slow, greedy balance teams centering on Clefable, whatever nonsense people are afraid of because they have no attention span and Clefable makes their blood start boiling. But Machamp is satisfying because you dynamic punch everything no matter what and you get bailed for it. So, yeah, that's basically it. I'm happy to expand, but I also know I tend to go in circles sometimes.
Maybe we could talk about Clefable a bit because I don't know. Like, I found Clefable annoying. Specifically, the team you passed me, whenever you're up against a similar paced team that also runs Clefable, it always turns out like neither of us want to get knocked off on anything but Clefable because it's too punishing. Like, I can't lose Lofties on Skarm because I'm going to lose to Jirachi later. Or I can't lose it on, like... I guess I could... No, you can't even go Rotom. Of course not. You have to go to Clefable. And then you both knock each other off and you just sit there for a million years. And neither of you wants to leave. And
I mean, yeah, that is the price you pay for a lot of those Clefable teams. Because when that team was built, it was meant to be, which by the way is 7 years ago, 7.5 years ago. It was very anti-offense because that was really a dominant team style at the time. So I wasn't really worrying about other stall matchups, especially because yes, it's awkward for a while. There are lots of stall teams that just devolve into Clef Wars, but in the long game, you will wind up coming on top because if your Clefs kind of trade themselves for each other. Then you have a classic hazard game, and then Jirachi will be able to threaten big time in the late game. So you just kind of grin and bear it. Like, yes, it's annoying, but not really broken. That's a team building choice, Like I choose on that team. Yeah, I choose on that team to just kind of grin and bear it against other Clef because I know I'll be fine in the late game generally. But yeah, it can be annoying. If I were trying to make the team more like I used to have different movesets on those Pokemon, like T-Tar and Nidoqueen both used to have Roar just because they help against pretty much everything. And I was even thinking about it in this ladder run because I was like, I'm so sick of Gyarados trying to set up on them. And if they had Roar, then it would be a non-issue. But I ultimately decided, to make the choice. I'll be fine with the moves they have because they're just generally covering more offensive Pokemon, which I need them to. So with that in mind, then it's the same idea. If I were trying to make that team more well-rounded against Clef, I would consider things like... I wouldn't use T-Spikes on Nidoqueen, first of all, because T-Spikes are pretty much just a Machamp thing at this point. So I would use... at one point, I was using a Taunt Super Fang on Nidoqueen, which is great, by the way, and it's very good against offense. I would consider similar things on T-Tar and maybe even Skarm. You could run triple Taunt there if you wanted. That kind of team is very flexible. But if you were trying to really run a stall team that is good into other Clefs, then you would take a different approach. You would use things like Gliscor, Gastrodon with Sticky Hold. There's a lot of things you can do. Encore Clef of your own. That makes a big difference. There are even some stall teams that use Lunar Dance Cresselia to restore your Clef's PP once you've run out of it against opposing Clefs. So you basically have two Clefs. and that's really huge. So the DPP metagame before the introduction of Clef was very, very hazard heavy, and Clef was an answer to that. And by the way, people complained before Clef. People complained about how many hazards there were everywhere. So I always take those Clef arguments with a grain of salt. Like, yeah, you can't beat Clef through Leech Seed and T-Spikes and Will-O-Wisp, but I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, so I think it's fine. Like, yeah, it's irritating, but it's the team building choices that lead to it being a particularly type of irritation. So, yeah.
I think I was just facing that
don't think
matchup a lot.
issue,
A lot of people were running similar like Clef stall teams. I was just getting so sick of it in this particular suspect.
If I were making the team for a more well-rounded approach, like I was a few years ago, then I would use some different movesets. But when I was playing, it was literally every game Azelf lead Paraspam or Zapdos lead Paraspam. So I was like, I'm going all out anti-offense in this. And if I face a stall team, I will just make it happen with Jirachi and Scarf Rotom plus hazards, which is very possible. Like threatening the Rotom trick and then going from there can be very helpful. So, but yeah, of course, Clef is annoying, but that's a team choice, not really a metagame thing. Clef is restrictive, but I think it's a healthy kind of restrictive.
That's a fair assessment. And like I'm not as well versed in Gen 4 team building as you are, so I wasn't like teching myself for what I was facing. I was just jamming the same team, to be honest, and kind of.
No, I know. But I have seen like more experienced players also really hate Clefable and claim, look, I gotta do this and that, but or we gotta get rid of it for this and that reason. Rather.
I don't think it's ban-worthy. I don't think it's ban-worthy. It's just kind of annoying sometimes.
No, I don't think so either. I think it's just irritating.
What I hate that it has knockoff in particular. That's the part that really annoys me because
imagine
if like Blissey in Gen 3 or something had knockoff.
Well, it would be extremely banned.
Yeah,
but
it does feel like that. It's just Clef's in, and what do I do?
Yeah, I agree. It is. It is intense. It's a lot, but it's also a good thing because it forces those like people hate stall teams for their hazard spam and whatever, but Clef is actually very a response to them because before Clef came around, you had these stall teams which were just almost purely passive, and then they pretty much auto lose to Clef, which is why you don't see them anymore. But yeah, I think it's a healthy response all in all.
I almost wish it felt better. I don't know. My impression of Gen 4 is that it's kind of feels inconsistent to build around Rapid Spin. I've seen some teams that do well with it, like those Forretress stall teams and I think some Donphan ones. Sometimes Starmie too. But compared to Gen 3, I feel like the spinners have a much easier time actually spinning.
You mean in Gen 3 it's easier for like Claydol and Starmie to spin?
I think so. Especially Claydol.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I also think that Rapid Spinners just kind of suck in general. I've made a bunch of videos on this subject before, but like look the direction Black and White always goes in, or
just
Oris,
ignoring hazards,
or ignoring hazards. Even Advance. It's not like you have a lot of good spinners. Black and White and Oris, they have Excadrill, and that's it. Like good spinning in that tier is pretty much just Excadrill. Tentacruel on Rain, yes, but that's restrictive and also very flawed because Jellicent, never mind, I in big trouble. Starmie is all sorts of unreliable, as it is in DPP, of course. So it's pretty much you have one spinner you over rely on, which in Advanced that would be Claydol. Starmie kind of in DPP, although Donphan is actually very good in DPP. I think it's a great Pokemon. But like the fact of the matter is spinning is always reactive and hazard stacking is very proactive. So when you're pushing the metagame forward to its, I don't want to say end state, and because I hate the concept of things being solved in Pokemon because it never is solved. But whenever the metagame is advancing, let's say, it always goes, like this is a cross-generational thing. You don't focus on spinning to deal with hazards, you just focus on ignoring them. And if you are going to spin, you find that one spinner. It's not like, here, take your selection from our, massive variety of great spinners. It's in lower tiers, sure, but not in OU. Yeah, so I think that's just a natural progression. I mean, people also say, DPP has been completely ruined by Paraspam. Like honestly, like this whole RNG maxing thing is not just a DPP thing. Like you see it in every generation as well. Like as time goes on, we realize hazard removal sucks, not just spinning. Defog is also very exploitable. Hazard removal sucks, speaking in broad terms, and paralysis and odds are generally OP. So they get crammed together, and then you have a very simplified game because these things also do the work for you a lot of the time. It doesn't take a genius of advance to get up spikes with Skarmory and then switch around against a team that's very vulnerable to spikes. It doesn't take a genius of DPP to click Dynamic Punch with Machamp against a team that has, only resists to it and not like Slowbro or something. By the way, you can't even use Slowbro to reliably beat Machamp because a lot of Machamp teams have CBT Tarp. Anyway, so yeah, we gravitate towards these elements of the game that are naturally going to be and being a catch-all is not a bad thing because sometimes you don't want the other side of the coin where, oh my god, I can't possibly counter everything that's being thrown at me. But you also don't want it to go too far and pretty much just say, you know what, my answer to everything is paralysis, flinch, confusion. Yeah, so, and hazards are in a similar vein where, I mean, I've made my point, so I'll stop repeating myself now.
Yeah, it's a fundamental thing in Pokemon to just like throw out little jabs where there's a chance, like, throwing out a Scald Burn, throwing out a Body Slam.
Exactly.
I think in Gen 4 it's amplified though, where like that is actually like a stronger strategy than it should be. I don't think Paraspam should ever be as good in Gen 4 as it is. In Gen 3, Paraspam's a good strategy, but it's not at the center of the metagame, and it's kind of flawed.
I agree, but I think it's not just Gen 4 in that regard. For years, there were, like, forget Clefable and DPP. The Clefable in Oris was hated because it T-waved everything, and games would wind up in Calm Mind Clefable Wars. And obviously, if you were good at Oris, then you wouldn't let that happen, but sometimes it was inevitable, and it was stupid, and a lot of it was para. So, or Gen 7 had a lot of this, even though para was nerfed there. Things like Glares, I mean, Superior, my god. And in Oris as well. So it's not even just T-Wave, just like it's not just T-Wave and DBP with Body Slam Jirachi. And I mean, even Black and White has had a hefty chunk of this, with para supporting something like Reuniclus, or, Clefable is now being used there as well. So it's just kind of this, I don't want to call it an endpoint, but a point where we figured out, hey, we know how to deal with, because previously everyone was complaining about matchup, right? And now it's less matchup and more, hey, I figured out this strategy that beats everything. It's stacking hazards and using Magic Guard and spamming paralysis, to varying extents. So it's just kind of these super strong game elements all kind of coming together and working against basically everything, because they're so strong. Like, think of it how like Kyogre and Politoed are equally vulnerable to hazards, right? And that kind of makes everything else feel much more manageable, because Leech Seed does 12.5% on the Switch to everything that's not a Grass type or a Magic Guard Pokemon. So you don't have to worry about whether Ho-Oh is switching in or whatever else. You're still doing that 12.5%, becomes much more easy, and you can just kind of pivot your way around everything. Now, the passive damage thing, you don't want to get too lazy with it, but it's generally healthier because you still have to work for it. And if your opponent lets you get away with it, then, they're letting you get away with it. As opposed to paralysis, where there is no, quote-unquote, letting them get away with it. It's, I hope my Pokemon doesn't get flinched. And for all this talk about how Machamp is slow, Machamp is weak, frail, that doesn't stop it from doing Machamp things. I was looking through some old logs in the Smog Tour server because I was like, am I completely crazy, or was this Pokemon not getting complained about constantly? And the logs I found were even more vindicating than I realized, because I was absolutely astonished at how openly these people despise this tier, specifically because of Machamp. Not Jirachi, not Gyarados at this point, but Machamp. And now suddenly, oh, those dumb DPP players. So you get what I'm getting at.
Yeah. I wonder, do you think paralysis is fundamentally OP, or is it just in Gen 4 that it's a bigger problem?
No. I think as stupid as it is in Gen 4, I think it's just a really ridiculous status. I don't like it. Well, at GSC it's very manageable because of rest talk and everything, which is one of the great things about GSC. And I understand it's quote unquote necessary in RBY, so I won't really speak to those. But I think it's also really, really stupid in Gen 3 even. Every generation, I just think it's a ridiculous strategy because 25% to full para is a lot. And you get a lot of opportunities to get just one full para. And even in advance, you see dumb stuff happening all the time, usually surrounding Jirachi. But I mean, even when Zapdos decides to start T-Waving, and you think, oh, I have a Blissey, that's not going to happen. And then the T-Wave of it all winds up ruining you, or like Celebi or whatever. So I'm not saying that T-Wave Zapdos is broken in advance, to be clear. But I'm saying that the potential for stupid stuff absolutely happens there. I mean, we even see T-Wave T-Target used sometimes. So yeah, I'm not a fan of paralysis at all, and I don't think that it's uniquely ruining DPP or something. I mean, yes, it's dumb, but it's fundamentally dumb. Like think of it like when someone gets a full para in RBY and someone goes RBY moment. It's like, is that really an RBY moment or is that just paralysis?
That's true. In Gen 3, I feel like it's much more manageable because at least you have like Natural Kill Blissey. You know all the things that have T-Wave. And I mean, Jirachi Slam
No, of
can be
course, of course.
annoying.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. It is much more manageable, of course. And like one of the more dangerous uses of T-Wave in the tier is not even for full para. It's something like Arrow, or not Arrow, sorry. It's something like Gyarados luring in like an Arrow or a Zapdos and
Yeah.
T-Waving them. But at the same time, like full para does pop up sometimes, and when it does pop up, it's stupid. Like I'm not saying that it's an issue in the tier that needs to be addressed. I'm saying that when para pops up in advance, then it has similar effects. It's less abusable for sure, but if someone decides, I'm going to start paralyzing things and then hiding behind substitutes, it gets similarly hairy. McMegan used to use this great Jirachi set, Sub Body Slam, Fire Punch, HP Grass, and like you look at that set and you're like, okay, Fire Punch, HP Grass is eternal, but with Body Slam, you're not really, there's a lot that you're not really threatening, and it would just kind of cause havoc through paralysis alone. So I remember that set and how effective it is, even though it's not actually doing damage, just through the para spreading it achieved, wound up doing way too much damage.
That's a great set, the mixed Jirachi set. I just wonder, like, should we take it on a gen by gen basis with stuff like because sleep is not banned in every gen. It's banned in Gen 5 and Gen 9, and I
think it should be though.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, you can argue more for
the exact same.
Right.
I mean, look, it all boils down to free turns, right? We know now free turns are super broken. Not just like, oh, don't give your opponents free turns through Hyper Beam, but in the sense of why we have
flinch,
freeze
para,
clause,
sleep,
or even just one freeze. So sleep, para, freeze, all of these free turns you get, or flinch, of course, or confusion. As soon as you can't move, then the game is taken out of your hands to what would be called a ridiculous extent. Like, notice the common theme here. Like, I would get rid of sleep. I do think freeze is ridiculous, which is why we have a freeze clause. And paralysis is an issue. Flinch, confusion, all these things that disable your ability to move. I mean, thankfully, attract is not used because it's completely unreliable. But you get what I'm getting at. Once you remove the opponent's ability to move and skill express or however else you want to phrase it, then it's a major issue for the game because then you do turn it into just kind of sitting there and hoping, well, I hope this works out. And even like the response to sleep and sleep talk, even that's RNG. There was a really famous game, I don't know if you saw it, before sleep got banned in Black and White in 2019. It was Ojama versus We Three Kings, or Moxie Infinite, or Lasse, or however you call him. And he had a slept Scarf Lando, I think, and he beat Ojama because Sleep Talk called the right move every time. There was no, I'm going to predict the U-turn, I'm going to predict the eco, I'm going to predict the HP ice. It was literally just the Sleep Talk getting the right 33% every single time. So, and I know some people have similar complaints about GSC. So, and Sleep Talk is also very unreliable in DPP and other generations. So, I mean, even fitting it into your move slot. So, yeah, I think Sleep is similarly ridiculous. And, when you dumb the game down to just one player having the RNG and the other player going, well, hope this works, and one player going, well, hope this works, and the other player going, well, you know, I'll sit here and hope I break through, then I don't think that's really what the game should be. And it is explicitly stated in the Smogon tiering policy framework thing that we are trying to make the game so the better player wins. And sitting there with free turns is not really. I mean, I realize I hear these arguments in my head, so I know someone's going to say, "Oh, well, but it's not free because if you break through the flinch or the confusion or the full para, it's like that's not the point. The point is whether you do that or not is based on luck. And if the luck doesn't go your way, as it so often does not, because the odds are so high, then you are sitting there doing nothing. It would be one thing if it was like, even crits, let's say, 20 or 6.25, and then later it got knocked down to whatever it is, to take double damage or 1.5 damage starting in Gen 6. Even that, you can still move. You can get crit and then recover off the damage. Things like that. But to not be able to move at all, I'm not saying that crits don't randomly take away your ability to move because they've KO'd you, but you get the difference. Just fundamentally fishing for freebies is an issue, and of course crits are much less likely than all the other stuff.
I wonder if I'm just like used to all this stuff that I'm just like accepted the existence of it, because I don't mind. I feel like para helps against like, I don't know, Jirachi in Gen 3, like Wish Protect Jirachi, like being able to para that. Eventually you'll get some free turns against it, and like maybe I shouldn't be.
Yeah, but you also think that because Jirachi is constantly statusing you.
Yeah.
So
and like,
I think it's a kind of extended Stockholm syndrome where we're so used to this nonsense, and to be clear, it is nonsense, that we're just suddenly like, what do you mean you're taking away this thing that's clearly bad for the game? Like I'm certain when Jirachi eventually gets put up for test, people are going to go, come on, is Ironhead... People have already done that. The whole decade and a half of Jirachi flinching out resists, and suddenly people are going, okay, that doesn't actually happen. If I know you got to make your team prepared for Jirachi, obviously, just like you make your team prepared for T-Tar, Arrow, Rock Slide in advance. That doesn't mean that it's not still nonsense. So I do think we're so used to it that we just kind of accept it, even though we shouldn't. And there's a real life parallel to that. So if you think Pokemon doesn't help in real life, think again.
I like the status quo though. Have you considered that? Well, I don't know. Like, I like sleep sometimes, depending on what Pokemon has it.
You could like it even more, though. The thing is, it could be even better.
Like, without sleep?
Yeah.
I mean, in Gen 3, I like Smeagol offense. I like Venusaur lead and stuff like that. I don't like Hypnosis Gengar because it's inaccurate, and Gengar shouldn't have that.
Look, if we could limit sleep to just Smeargle and Venusaur, I would be happy. I'm very anti-Hypnosis Gengar. I'm even anti-Jinx, really, because it's just ridiculous fishing. But
I don't even mind like Sing Blissey. What do you think about like Sing Blissey? I don't even mind that.
I think it's fine because it just gets so many opportunities. Eventually, it's going to work.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not really, and it's a valuable move slot and all that.
The problem is that the developers aren't like intentionally designing each Pokemon to be balanced with sleep. Like it's kind of just in God's hands.
So. Yeah, it's kind of like would you sacrifice Power Herb Sky Tag Gliscor in Gen 4 if it meant getting rid of Ironhead? Like, I like that set a lot, but yeah, I would. Yeah. So I think it's similar. Yeah, I think the status quo is nice and everything, but the metagame could be better. And again, I mean, talk about real life parallels. A lot of people will be like fairly comfortable. It's like, yeah, but if we change this, it could be a lot better, right? And you're comfortable with it, not even necessarily because it's good, but because you're just so used to it. And then they go, oh, I don't like change, and then we're stuck in a bad situation. So I think it's absolutely something that should be considered either way. I lost my train of thought, sorry.
You might be right. I mean, like with sleep banned in Gen 9, it wasn't even banned for any. Like, sleep isn't more broken in Gen 9 mechanically than it is in any other gen. It just happened to be on a bunch of fast Pokemon that just like got free turds unfairly when they had it. And instead of complex banning those Pokemon from being able to use sleep moves, which I guess there's issues with doing that because of policy, but yeah, instead of that, they just banned outright.
Yeah, so I think they had the right idea there. Just you could say,
Well,
oh, it's
maybe, yeah.
unreliable. The whole
thing
point
is
is that it's
yeah, I argued against that,
free.
like in a what do you call it? Just in a logical sense, but it has made the metagame better. Like Gen 9's actually in a pretty good place right now, to be honest, relative to where it was
There you
before.
go. Like it's so easy to say, oh, we shouldn't ban things because even though those things being banned would make the game better. I mean, again, remember people used to argue for Baton Pass. Now nobody misses Baton Pass. Those same people are like, oh, remember when we had to deal with Baton Pass? That sure sucked, huh? And it's like, weren't you saying how important it was for the game? Like, give me a break. So not in regard to the sleep thing, but in general, I think people's first instinct is just to say no to everything. I I made a joke recently that I won't repeat exactly because it's kind of gross, but basically, so let me rephrase it to more polite terms. All right, let's say that there's a random mechanic that as soon as you KO an opposing Pokemon, you get to go on a date with Ana de Armas, right? So that just sounds awesome, right? Who's gonna say no to that? But the people who just love the mechanics of policy debate and everything go, well, that's not an in-game mechanic, therefore we cannot allow it, even though they would love to go out with Ana de Armas, right? So I think we are way too caught up in saying no instantly because we fear change or whatever other reason. And even though those changes would only benefit us, and then we look back and go, I'm so glad we made those changes, even if we were fighting tooth and nail against them to begin with.
Well,
So
what if Ana de Armas turns out to be a horrible person? Just like we can't predict how these things will affect the format. So
then you don't go out with her again. You don't go out with her
true.
again,
Nothing bad will happen, actually.
and it's okay. Just like if you ban sleep and suddenly, oh my god, the metagame fell apart. What are we gonna do? There's chaos in the streets because sleep is not in Gen 9 OU. I guess we unban sleep and it's back in the metagame. Look at that. Peace on Earth once more. So
that's damn true.
Yeah, the whole what if, people are turning over trash on fire, outside my apartment fear, I think is kind of ridiculous in a lot of senses. And just you go back and it's fine. I understand some people have the concern with the whole, oh well, I don't trust the system to undo mistakes. But at that point, why even have the system? If you really feel that strongly about it, you should be arguing for the complete abolishing of the system to begin with, because you are afraid that it's going to mess something up in the first place. And I don't think most people feel that strongly. And I think it's more just, a reaction to, oh, they're going to change something. I hope that doesn't happen.
It sounds like there should be changes to the fundamental system of things to allow complex
I'm not.
and allow.
I understand these are. Yeah, I understand these are old gens. I'm not advocating for monthly suspect tests. If someone were to say, let's test Mew or Manaphy or whatever, I'd be like, you know what? Maybe host like a side tournament or something first and see what it's like. But like, unleash it on the ladder with the intent of trying it for SPL? Like something like that would be too much. Or Mew, or even Salamence. I think Salamence would be manageable. I don't think it would be good for the game. But yeah, I think we should not be so terrified of change if it has a lot of reasoning behind it, and it does. And what drives me crazy is that we've been around this whole tiering system for so long, and the arguments made are so bad. Like, these arguments wouldn't have passed over a decade ago. Like, oh, what of its usage stats? What of its win rate? Like, that's not how it works at all. Wobbuffet was banned in Gen 4, and barely anyone used it in high-level serious play. And that didn't matter. I'm sure no one is, shilling for the unbanning of Wobbuffet in Gen 4. Yeah.
Well, now someone will. Now that you brought it up.
I'm sure they will, just because they don't actually have values regarding Gen 4, which might sound, a little pompous, but they generally are not invested in the tier. They just like something to participate in and go, oh, you guys are such idiots for trying to do this.
No, I often just ignore. Like, there's a lot of commenters on YouTube that will just literally be contrarian about every single thing Smogon does and not look at any of the nuance, which is I don't really value those things, but it does. I think
Smogon
that
donated $1 million to charity. Oh yeah? Well, why didn't they ban Talonflame from Gen 6 OU?
should have donated 2 million actually.
Yeah, something like that.
I think that Gen 4, in its current state, in my opinion, it's not been a fun metagame to try and learn. Like, there's a lot of things bogging it down. And I know the council wants to change it, and they just can't, and it's frustrating.
They're doing what they can.
Yeah.
It's funny because one of the reasons why Machamp doesn't actually have that high a win rate in those big usage rate in those big tournaments is specifically because the players playing in those tournaments know that it's not as reliable in just beating everything, because you're relying on coin flips and not, Heatran does 100% damage to Scizor and therefore I can rely on beating it this way. With Machamp, it's, Machamp does 60% damage to Scizor and I will beat it if it confuses, So you don't want to rely on that in a team tournament, especially if you're being selected for the tournament based on your skill. You shouldn't have to do that. The problem is when, people, I'm not saying it's only lower skilled people who use Machamp, but the problem is when you use Machamp to kind of make up for the skill gap and you just kind of dynamic punch everything, and it doesn't matter if the player is better than you or not, because you're leaving it up to, RNG. So yeah, no wonder, good players who have faith in their own abilities don't want to rely on that. But then when it does show up, you see games where it just kind of brings out the worst in Pokemon. So like the tier itself, I think is fine insofar as when good players play each other, they're much less likely to try and pull it, because it kind of like Baton Pass. I mean, obviously BP was way worse, but in the same way you wouldn't rely on Baton Pass against someone you knew you could outplay, because then you run into a bad matchup and you're like, what am I doing? I could have just played that game the normal way and I would have been absolutely fine. Machamp is, obviously, you have more control than BP. And sometimes Machamp does just roll over things in a crazy kind of busted way, but it doesn't do so with the consistency you generally desire. So, yeah, no wonder you're not going to be relying on it. And that's why you don't see so much of it between the top players playing it in the tournament. Not just because, I enjoy the tier too much to, dishonor it or whatever. If it's good, it's good. And it's reliable, and you use it to win. Don't be above it. But it's more about the control that you give up. I mean, look, I've used Machamp in tournaments enough to where I figured the way I liked it was with Bulk Up. Because with Bulk Up, you are not just praying to D-punch your way through everything. Suddenly, you are much scarier against Hippowdon and Skarmory because you're mashing your way through them. Or even something like a Reflect Latias, you even become more difficult to revenge kill. So with Bulk Up, you take the game into your hands more. But when you have, sub Machamp and your goal is to just, sub until you get a para and then D-punch everything, and hope that works. Yeah. Oh, I should also mention, anyone who says, oh, well, Machamp only has 8 dynamic punches. Yeah, okay, that works. Incidentally, that is true insofar as if you're playing like a hardcore stall team and they pivot around you with Rotom and Scarm and Protect, then yeah, you might, and like a physically defensive Hippo, then yeah, you might actually be able to take advantage of its low D-punch PP. But wasn't that the style we needed Machamp to break through? It doesn't make sense. It's one or the other. Either Machamp is an amazing stall breaker, or Machamp only has 8 dynamic punches and is unreliable. Personally, I find it falls more on the latter. But I also, don't think Machamp should be doing things it does regularly on the latter, which is dynamic punch its way through healthy, physically defensive Hippowdon. So, yeah.
Yeah. In conclusion, Gen 4's got a lot of problems, but maybe there's a good format in there somewhere. It's fun when...
I think there absolutely is. I think, look, every generation goes through this, where you settle into like a balanced state for a while, and everyone likes it. and then people are trying to find new strategies, and a lot of those new strategies result in optimizing cheese. That's how, like, even Black and White, which I rip on all the time, but Black and White has had some of my favorite metagames of all time. It's just then people remembered, oh, Cloister, oh, Paralysis plus Reuniclus, things like that.
Yeah, for Gen 5, I kind of
kinds
lived through that. The like right before people discovered those HO teams with like gem spam, and it was just like pretty fun actually.
Yeah, exactly.
But then it became very matchup fishy.
Yeah, there's definitely a good format in Gen 4, just like in Gen 5, Gen 6, all of them. But they also go through like Gen 6 was subject to a lot of hatred not that long ago because Manaphy Superior Volcarona Hyper Offense. Like, what is this nonsense? And then people adapted and it was fine. Sometimes you have to adapt. Sometimes you have to take some tiering action. The people saying, "Oh, well, has Machamp ever been broken before? This metagame's so old." It's like, actually, yeah, it's kind of been an issue, but now we know we're allowed to, not just put up and deal with it. We can actually do something about it more directly. So, yeah, I think, yeah.
In this case, do you think it's a matter of like things need to adapt to these problems, or we need to actually make changes?
Yeah, sorry, that was my point. People saying, "Oh, just adapt to Machamp." It's like the tools are not there. Is the thing. Like,
it's just Slowbro who sucks.
The methods. Well, it's not even bad. It's just not even that reliable, considering Machamp gets paired up with CBT Tar half the time. And hazards and Jirachi and Gyarados nonsense. But the issue is that the answers are very well known. It's not as simple as use Lumberry and use Ghost types and whatever. It's more that the answers are there and just more or less reliant on confusion, because that's kind of the whole point. That's why it uses Dynamic Punch even into Resist. Put it this way. Azelf used to use Colbur Berry to weaken Machamp's Payback, and also T-Tar's Crunch, but Machamp's Payback primarily, so that it could survive the follow-up Bullet Punch and get rocks and blow up safely. And what did Machamp do in response? It just Dynamic Punched the Azelfs. Like, it's going, oh, I can't KO it? Okay, well, I'm going to Dynamic Punch this Psychic type and go for the 50%. And what happens if the opponent doesn't want to risk the 50%? Well, they switch, and then you're also fine, because the same thing happens over and over and over. So, yeah, with that in mind, then Azelf eventually started running really, really bulky sets with Lumberry. I mean, yes, for Roserade and for, Jirachi Body Slam and whatever, but it was primarily because Machamp was Dynamic Punching it. And Dynamic Punch is always the answer. And if something is always the answer, like let's say you have absurd example, Mega Rayquaza. The answer is always Mega Rayquaza, right? So in a similar vein with Machamp, the answer is almost always to Dynamic Punch, because even if it's the quote-unquote wrong answer, it's going to bail you out so much that you'll get rewarded, and then is it even the wrong answer at that point? So,
and with what do you think about like Iron Head in that regard? There, do you think there's enough in the format to combat Iron Head, and do you think that, like, people who complain about that are?
I mean,
I don't know.
If we had to keep it around, I'd be okay with it. Just because my teams are generally very resilient against it, but I also think we would be better off without it. Like I'll go back to that Skarmory example where someone was going for the whatever hit KO with their and this wasn't like I have no options left kind of thing. This was beginning of the game, I am Iron Heading everything. And I mean, I think it's very clear how that's bad for the game. So yeah, no, I think I would put Iron Head up there, absolutely.
I found using it is sometimes you always have this like instant win button 60% of the time. Well,
I know
it's just alluring, and it's destroying
exactly
us. And it's turning us into apes that just click the button. It's like so bad for the game.
No, exactly. It's and Gyarados to a lesser extent, because when you have sub T-Wave Gyara, then your answer to everything is just, well, I'm not being faced with most paralysis immune Pokemon, so I'm just gonna T-Wave them, and then I'm gonna go for the Waterfall Flinch, and I'll fish for paralysis with subs, of course, and then I'm, whether it works or not is all up to RNG. But yeah, the Ironhead thing is the exact same idea, where it is like you said, it's always like the right move. Even if I mean I know I'm going in circles, but I don't know how else to phrase it because that is what the issue is. And if someone thinks it isn't an issue, I don't know how else to convince them. I'm sure I could find a way, but yeah, basically it is always the right move, no matter what your opponent has, and that kind of, or not kind of, it does fly in the face of what the game is supposed to be. Unless you want the game to just be, like uh coin flip simulator.
Maybe some people do because they're used to it that way.
Yeah. Again, Stockholm syndrome. It's crazy. I mean, look, if people can get used to, terrible living conditions and then go, you know what, this is great actually, then I'm sure they can get used to Machamp dynamic punching and iron heading. I mean, look, it kind of is consistent behavior for the Pokemon world because, like, how many times have you seen someone go, ugh, that guy complains about luck. Ugh, so immature. And then they get into a tournament battle and all the eyes are on them and they get lucked and suddenly they're complaining about how Pokemon is so stupid and their opponent is terrible, and then it's like, oh my god, no, this game is so ridiculous. So, and they, if they see the dissonance in that, they don't care, or they don't see it, or they trick themselves into not seeing it, whatever it is. So it's fairly par for the course. Doesn't make it less stupid, of course, but it is. It is.
I don't think it's possible to play this game like long term and like not get frustrated with it sometimes. It's just impossible.
No, of course. No, I think it's weird to not get frustrated with Pokemon.
Yeah,
just,
sometimes I get comments that are like,
attitude.
"Wow, you're so mature," or I don't know, like. I would simply not react. Is this meme I say? Like, I would simply not react if it happened to me. Like, no, you wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you would be furious if this happened to you.
That would not upset me personally. I don't know what your problem is, but I don't know if I'm just like better than you or something, but I just would be okay with it. But I mean, obviously there are like ridiculous meltdowns that are unwarranted, but then also acting like getting mad because your opponent had one turn to get like a T-Bolt para full para and got it is also obnoxious. You know what happens in this regard, actually? There are some people who will just like it is good that we are now very aware of RNG, so we don't just let it happen to us. And if you can, make the odds, I don't know, 90% instead of 60%, then yes, of course you should. And if you don't, then you have to accept a lot of the blame for that because you had a much more reliable win path. But when people say, oh, you had a 90% win, but you could have made it like a 92% win, you deserve to lose that game. Those people are insufferable, especially because that doesn't apply to them. Those people, when they lose, they just go, oh, nothing I could have done. So, yeah. This is extended into my treatise on hypocrisy in the competitive Pokemon scene as a whole. But yeah, it's why a lot of this discussion kind of makes sense. Like, the fact that it doesn't make sense because that's just kind of how we tend to be.
So I just feel crazy sometimes. I don't know. Like, I'm playing this format where the best Pokemon has a 60% flinch move. And some people are telling me, like, it's a skill issue, Jimothy.
No, I 100% agree. The skill issue. No, listen. The skill issue would be if your team had frail steel resist with no leftovers. Because if that's the case, then yeah, no wonder Jirachi Ironhead flinches you. Because it almost doesn't even have to Ironhead flinch you at that point. It just kind of will wait you out. Like, if your answer to my Jirachi Ironhead is Scarf Rotom and Sand, it's like, okay, well, I'll win this in 20 turns because I just switch out and wait for it to die. Or like if it only needs one or two flinches, then yeah, that's not really a skill issue. Or that is kind of a skill issue that you let that happen. But if it needs like, 15 and it gets them, which it does, I don't know why people sometimes act like it doesn't. Well, I do, but I don't. Then that is not really a skill issue. It's like, oh, well, the odds were in my favor. Oh, well, it did it again. So
I also think you got to like zoom out sometimes and look at it from a detached POV, and it's like, is it like a fun thing to build around this stupid flinch move all the time and consider it at every avenue of everything you're doing? Like, it's not like a fun thing for the meta to center around. It's just not.
You know how switch moves sometimes get complained about because they're so easy to use that they also become like obvious in the right move. I remember once I had a tournament game where I was really calculating out the end game. I was making sure everything was planned out and simple. And not simple, sorry, planned out and safe. I didn't want to throw it away. And then I realized my best move to make was just to U-turn a bunch. And it wasn't like a case of, oh, I'm just going to spam U-turn and hope it works, because, that can backfire. But switch moves are so often so powerful that they kind of dumb the game down in that sense too. I remember almost being annoyed at how obvious it was that U-turn was the right move, So
Yeah, I get what you mean.
and Ironhead is the exact same thing, where it's the best move, and to not use it, I don't think Jirachi is so busted that to not use it with Ironhead is to make yourself worse off for no good reason. But I do think the issue is there for sure, because it doesn't matter how suboptimal or whatever it is when the opponent is just going to try it and get bailed out. And I mean, I've said it a million times, but that is unfortunately how it works.
I mean, I will admit there was some games I played where I was like, this end game is so complex, but if I get the flinch right now, I'll win. So I could play it safe,
Exactly, yeah.
and it'll take 80 turns or whatever, or I could go for this flinch and save myself like an hour. So I went for it and I got it.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's just like, okay.
And yeah. And I know there are always people who go, oh, do you have to ban it? Can't you just deal with it? It's like, if that's really your logic, you should be campaigning for the unbanning of everything. Because the whole point of banning things is to foster as competitive an environment as we can. Also arguments, trying to make Pokemon competitive, haha. No one's saying it's going to be perfect, but you can make it more competitive. So the whole, I want my toys to play with, stop trying to make it competitive, that's very short-sighted, and it drives me absolutely insane that these arguments are still being thrown around in almost 2025.
Yeah, I think what people should take issue with is like the policy stuff bogging things down and making it so the community can't even do what they want. Like that's probably the biggest problem that we have. It's not like the act of banning anything is bad and like somehow the universe will adapt. Every game, most games have nerfs. Like I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. In every game community, people complain about like a broken strategy and it gets dealt with. Like why is Pokemon different? It's not like it's very rare that a game in its default state is perfect. Actually, that rarely happens because it's like an iterative process and you don't know how things are going to evolve. They're like, oh, this is broken. Yeah, nerf it.
Look, we think we're so unique that we would not benefit from best of 3 to a significant degree. So I don't know what to tell you.
That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, it's like, well, statistically it would only be this and this, and the preparation. Yeah, so we have this idea that we're so special that we shouldn't ban a lot of things because a small ban list is good, and such and such and such and such. And I get at least in the advanced days, right, when there was no tiering, then you just kind of put up with everything, right? So I understand that. But as soon as you introduce tiering, then look, you either have tiering or you don't. If you want a dictatorship that says, here's your ban list day 1, go nuts, then sure. But if you want that, then lobby for it. But if you want tiering and you want bans, then you can't say, okay, well, we ban this and that, but then we arbitrarily cut it off there because nothing else could possibly be broken.
Yeah. I mean, the arguments always feel consistent to me. Like, oh yeah, the Ubers should be banned, but these things shouldn't be banned. I don't know. Like, there's a million different voices that all seem to want different things and are equally furious about the format not being exactly what they want. At the end of the day, you got to compromise and everyone has to agree on something as a community. No, it's not like you just get to be I don't know.
I don't think people even really know what they want. I think they just kind of reactively protest to change. But if you ask them, oh, what's your ideal metagame, whatever, I don't think they would be able to, at least not immediately. It's not a thought they consciously have. I think the metagame should have this and that and that. You can compare it to movies where people think they know what they want. They'll say things like, oh, well, I want something new that I've never seen before. But then you propose something that's actually new that they haven't seen before, and they protest and they go back into their shell. So they think they want something, refreshing, but they really want something safe that is kind of refreshing. So it's kind of a combination of people don't really know what they want in a lot of cases, and they tend to be bad at expressing themselves. So, yeah.
Would you still say Gen 4 OU in its current state is your favorite OU format? Would you still stand by that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
What do you think of the
But
format's
I
greatest
recognize
strengths, like in a competitive
I
sense?
think my favorite thing about DPP is still the fact that it demands you actually play the tier if you want to be good at it. Because there's this rise of like players who don't really play the tiers. They wind up playing in tournaments, and they just kind of coast because they're generally good at Pokemon, and they get teams from their friends. So they kind of lose. They don't really lose much. I mean, obviously, you will always have an advantage if you are very involved in the tier, but you can kind of, you know, that same idea where you always click U-turn, you always click Iron Head because it's just the best move, and it doesn't really matter how much thought goes into it. Like that tournament game I had where I was thinking for like 3 solid minutes, and my opponent was like, "What are you doing?" And I should have told him to shut the hell up because I'm thinking and I want to win. But at the time, I was like, "Oh no, I'm politely just thinking and calcing things." And he goes, "What are you calcing? I don't need to understand." So I should have told him to forfeit if he felt that strongly about it. But yeah, the point is, I thought about those moves for 3 minutes to make sure I wasn't passing anything up. And then the move wound up being the most obvious safe one. And that's kind of what it can be like for, like, you don't have, again, that earlier point, you don't have to be an advanced genius for Skarmory to wall things and spike and to wear your opponent down in advance, where you just generally go off Pokemon sense and knowing the type chart. So, I mean, obviously, then you develop more of a knowledge for the metagame, but like, I know there are players out there who have played for so long in certain tiers and they can't discuss it at all. Like they cannot hold a conversation because they never thought of it. A long time ago, there was this player in the late stages of an individual tournament, and they asked me for help, and I was like, okay, well, what do you like? And he was like, I don't really know. I just kind of go with what I get. So can you send me some teams? And I said, okay, well, you can use this or this, and the options for this team are this. And the response was just, what do you think is best? I don't really have a preference. So just because you can succeed in Pokemon without really understanding the game is what my point is. Now, you will not like get to the highest level, of course, if you do not really engage with the tier and try to understand it. But as far as winning some big tournament games goes, then yeah, absolutely you can. Like there's a story, a very famous one, of a guy who won a DPP live Smogon tour, and the entire tournament he thought his Rotom Wash was a ghost. He thought it was a water type. He didn't know it was Electric Ghost in Gen 4, but he was winning. Like, and I mean, talk about like, and nothing in those games, in those like 7 games or however many, forced him to come to terms with the fact that his Rotom was, in fact, Electric Ghost and not Electric Water, because he was coming from Gen 6. So, with all that in mind, then you see how Ironhead and... so, yes, my point about DPP. Ironhead and D-Punch and Waterfall, yes, they're stupid because you don't need any experience to rock them to victory. However, what I find DPP generally rewards more, for me anyway, it might just be my familiarity, I admit, but I find DPP extremely rewarding because whether it's something more balanced or something more, stupid, I find that it is most rewarding of actually engaging with the metagame and understanding it. Because if you understand it, you can most specifically tweak it to where you will be able to take on whatever it is you're facing. Or, the metagame at large, I find. And I really appreciate that. A lot of the reason DPP started getting its maligned reputation about 7, 8 years ago is because it was being played by a lot of these players who were just kind of autopiloting, and they didn't understand the tier. And like you can autopilot in a team preview tier more easily. I'm not saying easily, but more easily. Or in advance, where Skarmory stuff is so strong that you generally just are pretty well covered against most of what you're going to face, just by virtue of having it. But in DPP, it's much harder to consistently autopilot if you don't know the tier. That's where this whole idea came that, oh, the metagame is too strong to not have team preview. which is complete nonsense, as demonstrated by the success of defensive teams, if nothing else, but also the fact that you can figure out the last, but you have to know the metagame. Like the same opponent I had who was like, hey, hurry up and click U-turn. Why are you calking? This was also an opponent who was saying, hey, why I can't figure out your last in DPP. I feel like this shouldn't be so difficult. This was said in an official tournament playoff game. And it's like, what do you mean, why shouldn't it be so difficult? You don't play the tier. And it was just this whole, DPP sucks because I can't figure out the last. And then it extends to DPP sucks because I don't know the metagame and I don't know how to play around these threats. Therefore, it's the metagame at fault. But that's exactly what I like about it. If you actually play the tier, then playing around these threats or figuring out last is second nature. But if you don't play the tier, then you are at a substantial disadvantage for it. I'm not saying DPP doesn't have stupid stuff, but every metagame has stupid stuff. I mean, every generation, or almost every generation after this, has Scald, for God's sake. So, yeah, I think that the way it forces you to engage with the tier, if you really want to be successful with it, is my favorite thing about it. And I found that in this ladder session in particular, because I was using my familiarity with it to make my choices so as to most bypass the RNG fest being thrown at me. Not that a couple times it didn't just wind up doing stupid stuff, but Pokemon does stupid stuff. So, and overall, it was successful in doing what I had designed it to do. So,
well, maybe someday I'll understand your POV. Maybe I'll return to Gen 4 because I'd feel a bit attacked here because I also have had that critique of Gen 4 where like I can't figure out what is the tail on like what's in the back, and it's often like the exact threat that just destroys me or something, and that always like, well, how was I supposed to know that? Well, I guess with more experience you do learn that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like that doesn't happen because you played the metagame for like a week or something. Like the person I was playing, they were playing DPP in Smogon Tour, meaning that they were playing it over the course of an entire season. So you sign up for 2 tours a week over the course of 3 DPP weeks. They were playing 6 DPP tournaments in the time coming up to that, and they still didn't know it because they didn't really try to understand the tier. It's not something you develop. It's not an exact science either. But like you say, they had the threat that just happens to destroy me in the back. They were hiding it specifically because it gets more threatening early on, later on. They were specific. They know they're going to try and clean you up with that Trick Room Bronzong or whatever. And so they're specifically targeting what you have early on. And as soon as your Gyarados or whatever goes on, you're like, all right, Zong is going to get in and clean house now. It's not just, I lost my Gyarados and I happened to lose to a random Bronzong. No, the Bronzong wasn't random. Your Gyarados wasn't randomly targeted. The team was built and played in a way that was supposed to lure in and take the Gyarados out. And since Gyarados is your main check to not just Bronzong, but let's say something like Lucario as well, you got to be careful with it. And if your Gyara goes down, you got to say, all right, I really got to be careful, or something like a Bronzong, which is very feasible, is going to pop up. It's why as soon as turn 1 goes up, then you start putting team preview together in your head. Azelf lead, okay, here's what I know commonly goes with Azelf. Hippo lead, here's what commonly goes with Hippo. All sorts of things. And you make things, more and more likely as time goes on. I see a Heatran. Okay, that makes it much less likely that there's going to be a Magnezone. In fact, there's almost, I can barely think of any Heatran Magnezone teams. I can think of 1, maybe 2, and they're good, but they're also very niche. The point is not an exact science. It does not say Heatran means no Magnezone. It means Heatran means it is very likely there's no Magnezone. Therefore, I can just spike with my Scarm. And even as you see a Heatran lead, what's commonly paired with Heatran? So, you see where I'm going with this.
I think Gen 4 is unique in that sense that there's a bunch of options and no team preview. It's the only Gen where that's the case. So that's just a common problem that people eventually do face in their journey with it, is you have to do that way more, and you don't have to do that in other gens.
I mean, it's kind of a similar thing in Advance, where as soon as you see the Scarm lead, you're like, all right, well, what's going to be paired with the Scarm?
The closest thing would be probably Gen 3.
But the thing is that the power level is lower. hey, the power level is lower and there's less passive damage, so you can kind of take your time figuring it out more. But, Advance also has that late game situation where it's like, oh, is that a Starmie in the back? Is it an Arrow? Is it a Moltres? Is it a Salamence? What is it? And that can be equally difficult to figure out. But at the same time, I'm sure you've also had games where you're facing an offense team and you're like, all right, well, that last is definitely DD Tar or DD Mence. Based on how they're playing, based on their team structure. Same idea for DPP. And you can also even look at it in a way like, okay, well, the scariest thing for them to have would be DD Mence. So I'm going to act as if it's DD Mence, and if it's not, then it's something less threatening, so I'll be fine. That's one way you can do it. Obviously, it's not always that simple. Sometimes the decisions get tougher. But yeah, that's the general idea.
Yeah, and I'd love to engage with that side of Gen 4 more, but I do feel like it is a bit bogged down by the strategies that I hate facing. Well, like, there's like the Jirachi stuff is just, I don't know.
Now is a bad time for it on the ladder because people are intent on dumbing the game down. So
I suppose.
And in that case, and that's what the point is. The point is, if you are playing the game of Pokemon, you should be getting rewarded for being thoughtful and creative and all that jazz. But if they have a button they can click that just kind of goes, well, hope this works, and dumb it down, so that U-turn I clicked all those years ago, or those U-turns rather, they would have been the same whether I had thought about it. For those 3 minutes or hadn't thought about it at all. Now, it's not necessarily bad if you just make a move because it's right, and it is good to think it through, to know that you're really making the right one. But the thing is that it shouldn't be. This was a U-turn at the end of a game where there are only a couple games left, Pokemon left. So it was much more simplified in that sense. Whereas U-turning early on and getting chipped by like a Rocky Helmet Garchomp, that might have been something I wanted to avoid. I remember there are several games where Brofist, he had this one game where he had, or actually I think it was 2 games in the same tournament, where he had a U-turning Lando, and he chose not to click U-turn. Because I was just talking about U-turn is the most safe, obvious, free move ever, and it rewards you every time. But he chose not to click U-turn specifically so he wouldn't take Rocky Helmet chip damage on the switch-in. He double switched instead. Because he's an amazing player, of course, but something like that does not really exist for something like Dynamic Punch. So you can, and of course, U-turn is not an RNG move, but the point is you should be rewarded for being able to think things through and come up with some counterplay. That counterplay to U-turn exists, but in DPP we don't have things like Rocky Helmet. There's no real effective static or flame body. And so these moves are very, very spammable and very difficult to punish. That's why I like Nidoqueen Poison Point so much. It doesn't work against Jirachi Ironhead, and you don't want to use it against Gyarados Waterfall if you can help it, but for Machamp, it's great. But yeah, that's the whole point. It just kind of throws it doesn't just throw their thought out the window, it throws your thought out the window, because what your move is doesn't matter in the face of Dynamic Punch. It just matters if you get lucky.
Yeah, any strategy that takes agency away is never fun, for sure. That's why, in our tournament, Sand Attack is banned, because it's not that good, but why have it?
Who cares? It's oh, do you need to ban Sand Attack? No, do you need it around? Here's again, I always boil it down to SPL, because I made that point earlier, right? Where that's where all the BS goes away, and it gets stripped down to, will this win? Is this reliable? So in SPL, sometimes you have these games where it's a complete mismatch. And one of the players is almost like a sacrificial lamb. Just, let's move our best player to another tier where they can get the win, as opposed to potentially having them lose to their best player, right? So you just throw in someone who's way worse against their best player, right? But that in a straight battle, they're very unlikely to win. Now, in the olden days, sorry to put on my old hat for a second, but in the olden days, if you had a big mismatch like that, you would just try and get good and be like, you know what? I'm going to outplay this guy. I'm going to be better than him. And that's how you have some of the greatest upsets ever. I remember one of my favorite players ever, Goki, one of the best. He once just lost a game to a guy nobody expected him to lose to. And it wasn't because the guy cheesed him or anything. The other guy just had a career game. He just played really well. But now, since we are, very statistical, very numbers maxing, then people are going to go, all right, buddy, here's what you're going to do, because they make the decision for you because you're their player. You are not going to try and beat this guy in a fair fight. You stand no chance. Instead, we're going to load you up with the cheesiest cheese we can possibly find, and you're going to pray it works. Because that has the highest odds of stealing the game. Or winning the game, rather. So, like, the general idea of if you're not favored, raise the RNG is not a bad one, but it also goes so far into people perceiving these unwinnable mismatches when just getting good is not an option, apparently. So it's because people also do it to themselves in their own head. I've seen this so many times where someone goes, oh my god, I'm playing Soulwind. Oh my god, he's going to set up Stealth Rock and Pursuit Me and U-Turn and Z-Move and Dragon Dance all on the same turn. Oh my god, he's so good. I don't stand a chance. It's like, what are you talking about? Someone can make one move on one turn like anyone else. God, we're playing Pokemon. Anyone can beat anyone on any given Sunday. So, the point is that, the mindset winds up being, you know what, you're just going to cheese this guy. You are going to baton pass, pray for luck, Meowstick screens and Oris. God, I can't believe that was done, because that's all you stand a chance with. And so, in those situations, you pretty much remove the whole this player is better than you thing, and you leave the game up to the odds of whatever the odds are. Machamp dynamic punching its way through everything. And that's not a good thing, because at that point, it defeats the purpose of the better player being better. If there's something in the game, like, look, if you decide your way of beating the better player is to just get like a bunch of crits, you're not going to do that almost ever, because it's so unreliable. But if you can fairly consistently just dynamic punch Ironhead Waterfall your way through everything, then, it doesn't matter who the opponent is, almost. So, yeah, and in a similar vein, that's why you get rid of Sand Attack. You think, oh, is anyone going to use Sand Attack? Well, no, that's why we don't miss it. But just like we don't miss the fact that we can't use Magikarp in Gen 5 OU because it has Swift Swim and Swift Swim is banned. But put it this way, if there is a form of cheese, someone will get it in their head, oh, no chance I beat this player, and they will start loading up the stupidest nonsense ever, because somewhere along the line, like, we're more conscious of RNG now. Again, that's a good thing. But it also got this idea into people's heads that the only way you ever beat this god on Earth is through RNGing everything you see. And that unhealthy perspective is what has led us to the situation we're in now, where you have to get rid of the Quick Claw and Bright Powder and whatever else. Otherwise, people will just throw on Bright Powder because I don't know what to do. I'm just going to hope I get lucky, and then they wind up dodging a close combat. So, yeah, that's that little...
It's a very lame
rant.
attitude, I must say. I think you should fight with honor.
I mean,
I think you should go for it.
I agree personally, because to me, what's important is, not that guy won necessarily, but look at how that guy played. Like, again, that's something I took from Goki. Because, like, if you win by using Baton Pass or whatever, no one's looking at that guy and going, oh, man, that guy's so good. It's like, yeah, that guy didn't have to... Like, that's why Advance was seen as so lame in the BP days. It's basically, okay, you didn't want to play the game. You wanted to cheese out a win. So I agree with the whole honor thing, but the thing is, in a tournament setting, you can't rely on honor. You have to get rid of that stuff. And you have to remove the possibility that someone... Like, if someone wants to, like, go pray with their stupid stuff, then they should not have very good odds for it, basically. If they want to avoid playing the game, if they want to avoid engaging in the test of skill, then, like if I decide, hey, you know what my method for beating everything on your team is? I'm going to crit it with the same Heat Train Fire Blast. I'm not going to get very far. But that does get much farther when you introduce something like Machamp Dynamic Punch, which is the whole point. So that's why, whenever people protest, oh, why should we get rid of Quick Claw or Dynamic Punch or whatever, it's exactly for that. That stuff should not. Yeah, there's an opportunity cost. Of course there is. But it's not the players who are confident in their skills who are using it. It's the players who think there is no opportunity cost because if they play the game straight, they're just going to lose. Which, again, it doesn't matter how wrong it is. Because they're just going to go for it and get rewarded anyway. Which, again, defeats the point. Again, I know we're going in circles. I just cannot emphasize it strongly enough. Specifically because so many in the community seem so unaware of this. And no matter how much I boost my voice, it has the same effect. So, yeah, I have to stress it because maybe repetition does potentially make something click at some point eventually, I think anyway. But yeah, if you think the game should be a test, like put it this way, ask yourself, are we trying to make the game a test of skill? If the answer is yes, then you should have no qualms with getting rid of these things. And if the answer is no, then, well, too bad, because the policy of the site, as we follow, the whole reason we have these rules is to make the better player win. As soon as you don't care about the better player winning, that's when you go play Anything Goes. If you want to play the tiers, then you implicitly agree to the fact that we are trying to make the game better, which is why we don't allow Rayquaza in OU. So, yeah, I hope that made sense.
I think it does make sense. Yeah, I don't know. Every time I hear about SPL, I feel like it's just a weird tournament.
It's very strange for many reasons, but generally it's great, which is why everyone likes it so much. But, you've seen over the last, I don't know, half decade or so, just this huge increase in no way I ever win, and I guess I'll win or lose at team preview. Like there was in SPL, I think it was 2019 or 2020, where the SPL finals had one side using a full baton pass team.
Jeez, yeah.
In advance, if that wasn't clear. Yeah. So, and it's just like, really, this is the This is. I get that not every team is going to have an advanced player of equal skill, but this is supposed to be the most elite tournament where everyone is picked to play. And you're telling me that this player is so outmatched, they have to go for BP? Like, I don't care if it's the number 10 ranked SPL player against McMegan. The advanced player who just started playing last year against McMegan. If they're an SPL, they should not have such a skill gap between them that they should feel the need to baton pass. And if they do feel that way, then I don't know what happened to Get Good. Is one of the things that's been running through my mind. It almost sounds like
we hate this game. Like, why have we even played this game? We got so many problems.
Well, no, see, the thing, we always ask ourselves that, right? But we love the game. It's just that the dumb aspects of it interfere with the aspects of it that we know are great. Like when people hate best of 3 because I don't actually like playing the game, or I just want to, hang around with my friends, and the game is the thing I have to do in order to do that. So I want to get that out of the way as soon as possible, whatever other dumb reason. Prep is too difficult. Prep is to Get Good. If I had to play an SPL game this evening, I would be able to, in DPP, obviously, in a tier I play, which I assume you do in these tournaments, then I would be able to come up with some teams. If I had to do it in an hour, I could come up with some good teams. Like, these are not foreign entities that we're experiencing for the first time. Yeah, or advanced or whatever. But I think we put up with all the everything from people's stupid arguments to Machamp Dynamic Punch because we know how great the game can be at its best. And the whole process of tiering and tournament policy and things like that is the attempt to weed out the stupid stuff so that we can enjoy the game at its best. Because we know it's possible. It's not just like something like, oh, well, hope this works. We've experienced it before. That's why we stick with it.
Yeah, I mean, people do comment that. That's why I brought it up. People say, like, if you guys are banning everything, do you even like the game in the first place? I could sort of understand, but I don't know. I think it's valid to have such
again,
complaints
if
about
you're
things that you love if you're involved with it. It's like people complaining about, I
again,
don't know,
if
the
you
Star
hate
Wars sequels or something. Like,
if you hate bands, oh no, that's a great comparison. There are plenty of movies I hate. That doesn't mean I hate movies. Um,
well, like a
like
franchise, you know.
again, if yeah, but if I if you hate bands so much, just again, Uber's is right there. Anything Goes is right there. I don't know why bands are so averse. It's like clearly you get rid of it because the potential is there, and you just got to get rid of this stupid thing, and then you're fine. Like for example, I think DPP, even when Doug Trio was around, like I liked DPP then. That didn't mean that it wouldn't be better without Doug Trio. You
Oh,
know?
that's something we haven't talked about. Some people want Doctor back.
No,
No,
no, no, no,
let's.
no, 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 no.
I don't
And
know.
no, anyone who says this, okay, there's some opinion. I'm
I
sure you would
literally have
agree
no
that.
thoughts on that. I don't know, to be honest.
Okay, no, no, no. What I mean is the general concept that if you have a certain opinion on certain things in life, it kind of disqualifies the validity of your opinion because by holding that opinion, you have demonstrated you don't know what you're talking about, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
If someone says the best movie ever is The Avengers, then you're like, okay, how many movies? And it's like 20 movies. Then it's like, okay, that's your opinion. You can have it, but also you know that no one's going to take this opinion seriously, right? And for good reason. Okay, that's how I feel about the free Doug Trio thing. People say, "Oh, it checks Jirachi." No, it makes Jirachi worse. As in, it makes it worse to deal with. You want to deal with Jirachi in a metagame where you can just remove Heatran and Magnezone and Empoleon with Doug Trio? No, you don't. I promise you don't. Also, Doug Trio doesn't even guarantee taking Jirachi out. Jirachi bulks itself out regularly, and even Banded Doug Trio doesn't take it out. So no, absolutely not. It's not a reliable answer to Clef either. In fact, Doug Trio famously made Clef pretty unbearable to deal with. So no, it does not check Jirachi and Clefable. It makes Jirachi and Clefable more difficult to deal with. Especially if you over-rely on Doug Trio for everything, and then the opponent Doug Trio's your Doug Trio, which, how does that happen? Oh, they lock into EQ, they come in, and they sucker punch you because you're locked into EQ. So goodbye. Yeah. No, it's Doug Trio is an ugly, ugly Pokemon to have around. Do not bring it back. Absolutely not. Anyone who says bring back Doug Trio has their opinion disqualified. I would sooner bring back Salamence than Doug Trio. I would sooner test Manaphy or Mew or all three than Doug Trio. Doug Trio just is fun should not be around. I don't even like Doug Trio in advance anymore. But DPP, no, forget it.
Well, I like it in Gen 3 still, but I don't know. I'm kind of getting sick of the ABR style teams that I helped to propagate that stuff as well, so it's my own fault.
I mean, Doug Trio is clearly the least problematic in advance, but I still think we would be better without it.
Possibly, I don't know. I'm used to it, but hey, that's I'd have to ponder that one. I'll say, I guess.
I think Triangles wants to host a tournament without it or something.
I'm open to the idea. I'm open to that idea. I think that's I think like we could people dismiss that as well. Like, why don't you try it out try a meta without this thing? Try a tournament. Like, why not do that and get some data? It won't, definitively say what the meta is going to be like long term. But it's interesting.
People just are generally now the Doug Trio thing I get because it all actually has like some good for it, so it's not the same as defending. Oh, actually, I think it's good when Skarmory can hit itself in the face. But yeah, for the record, I would also ban Confuse Ray. And
that's
Togekiss.
something.
Well, no, I wouldn't ban Togekiss. I would ban the flinch moves, obviously. But if it took a Togekiss ban, I would do that too.
We banned all Confuse moves in our tournaments. Now, I honestly think they should be universally banned, to be honest. If it was up to me as well, I reckon just Dynamic Punch, even in Gen 3. I hate it. Like Mixed Jirachi with Dynamic Punch is just a dumb set. But it is coverage sometimes, I guess. So
yeah, but I was using Body Slam, D Punch, Fire Punch, HP Grass about 10 years ago. It was great.
Yeah,
because the idea is with Body Slam paralysis, that you have better odds to hit because if you miss, they can still full para. And obviously, if you hit, then then you get parafusion. But no, it's stupid. Like, the reason is you can't like allow these Pokemon in their thoughtful, balanced forms if they also have an unbalanced form, because then people will dumb the game down with the unbalanced form and just pray. There was a classic playoffs game where there was a lead Jirachi against a T-Tar, and the guy with the Jirachi just went for Dynamic Punch on the first turn and hit and got the confusion. And
it was like, in Gen 3.
It was in Gen 3, yeah.
Oh my goodness. It's just so stupid because you're supposed to check Jirachi with Tar, and then it's 50% of the time it can hit you for.
I know, that's why, if you tried to Rock Slide flinch out a T-Tar, then you're much less likely to do that. But with, I don't know, I would just ban Dynamic Punch straight up and then, leave him a champ. But unfortunately, good ideas are illegal, apparently. I know that was petty, but that's a lot
of the problem people have is like, why don't you just ban Dynamic Punch or maybe No Guard instead of Machamp? And the reason is like they can't.
I would love to.
They can't.
Nothing would make me happier. Nothing would make me happier. Nothing would make the DPP Council happier. But it's not.
People
really
are not aware of that. We should make that more clear that it's not the council's choice there. Like,
yeah,
people don't know how this crap works, and how could they? Where's all the is there a trail you could follow? It's Kafka-esque. Where does it end?
Okay, I'm on the forums right now. So you go to the forums. You can, and I'll just give you things to Control F, so you don't have to look.
Yeah.
Control F policy review. You click on policy review. Then you Control F old generation councils. You see the official metagame councils, which are currently what they are, right? So that's the DPP council. Okay, then you go back. And I'm looking for... God, where is it?
Exactly.
I'm starting to see the point. Yeah, no. Okay, no, it was in that thread. I'm sorry. I thought it was, but then I clicked away too quickly. Okay, yeah. Basically, there is a leader of the Old Generation Council, as you see here. Like the Old Generation Council as a whole.
Oh, like all old gens has one leader?
It's Star. And I think before it was Star, August, and Shiloh. And I know that there's actually I think it might I have to find like senior staff or something. But yeah, basically there is and you can see in this thread August now co-leads Old Generation Councils. I think Xcal used to be the leader. Yeah, Xcal used to be the leader of the Old Generation Council. Then August replaced or joined him. And then Xcal resigned, and Star replaced Xcal. So it was Star in August, and I think Shiloh was the highest.
And would those people be the ones that
manage
requests from each individual old gen council, like for each gen themselves?
Yeah, except now it's just Star. So yeah, it's I was looking right at it, and I'm blind. But yeah, I was looking right at it, and it's right here that the Old Generation councils are. Tiering councils are Sword and Shield through RBY, and then at the very bottom it says Old Gen Council Leaders Star. So, but yeah, I know that Shiloh is also involved because he's in senior staff. So those are the people who have been involved in that discussion. I used to have the discussion with August as well, who was on DPP Council and was one of the Old Gen Council leaders. So
I see. I'm closer to understanding, folks.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose we should we'll leave it there then. I don't know if there's much more to say about all this, but...
Not unless you want me to go in circles some...
I did say in my video about my Gen 4 Suspect experience that I was going to make more of an effort to actually try every single OU format to get a more informed opinion on the metagame, because I realized that a lot of us in the community just have outdated opinions on formats, or just we don't have any hands-on experience, and yet we rate them anyway, and people have stereotypes about formats. They're like, let me actually give each of these formats an actual solid try here. It'll be a mission for next year.
Yeah, the thing is that you picked the worst possible time to try it with DPP, with the Suspect.
I suppose so. I don't know.
Because the metagame really is great. Like, if you look at actual good DPP tournament games, then you don't see the Machamp of it all that much, which is, one of the points made. But then you get on the ladder and suddenly everyone goes, I want free points. Give me, Iron Dynamic Waterfall nonsense. And... Of course, that's going to be...
Do you think the format's better suited to tournament play than ladder play?
Well, I think the ladder is generally fine, because when I've played on the ladder before, it's generally nothing weird at all. It's just that with the spotlight shown on the suspect, on it with the suspect, suddenly everyone's like, "Oh, Machamp's getting suspected. Well, I guess that means I gotta use the hell out of Machamp, and I'll pair with Jirachi. You know what? I'll throw a Gyarados in there too. I'll lead off with a Thunder Waver, and oh my god." So
perhaps my
um,
opinion on the format's getting clouded. Like, to me, that's what Gen 4 is. It's all I've been facing.
I mean, no, that's not the tier. Like, well, it is the tier right now, but that's because it's being dumbed down into that. It's not like everything that is viable, of course.
Right.
Think of it like if someone said advance is just, I don't know what stupid style.
Like Milo Claydol Stall or something.
Yeah,
Or,
sure. The most
what did
boring,
like double
obnoxious
trap Snorlax
style.
or something like that? Some matchup fish thing.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, that's clearly not what the metagame is. Like, or all the metagame is. If everyone decides to use it and make the game that, then I mean, I guess that's what it is. But that's not all it has the potential to be.
Well said, yeah. Well, I suppose then in the future, like right now, I'm not touching Gen 4 for a while, but I will return to it one day. Maybe Jirachi is dealt with in some capacity by then. Who knows? But
I think even just getting rid of Machamp will help a lot.
That's true.
Once
Yes.
once you can use fighting resist to answer a fighting type, as crazy as that sounds, then I think it might feel a little more playable.
Well, thank you for your time, BKC. I wanted to talk about
My
movies. I think we talked too much about Pokemon though. This took me more time.
Oh, that's okay. My main movie contribution is that I think everyone should watch a Spanish movie from 1973 called The Spirit of the Beehive. It's the greatest thing ever. I watched it for the first time at the beginning of this year, January 6th, I remember. And then I saw it again in August because I was in the States and they were showing it on 35 millimeter in New York. And the day before I went back, I cannot tell you how lucky I am. And I went, and it was like seeing the face of God. And I'm getting ready to bust out the DVD and watch it again because I had to get it on DVD, of course. Yeah, you like Barry Lyndon, right?
Oh yes, I love Barry Lyndon. Yeah.
Kubrick. Okay, I'm not gonna say he stole from this movie because that's maybe a little much, but he borrowed a lot from it for the whole aesthetic of Barry Lyndon, and he
wonderful.
was known. Yeah, he was known to say how incredible it was and how it was a favorite of his. And Kurosawa said the same thing. He was like, "Oh, this is one of the most unbelievable things that's ever been done. It's so beautiful, I can hardly even put it into words." Which is why movies exist, of course.
Yeah, I just looked it up and read the little
extraordinary.
synopsis, and it sounds very intriguing. It says, after seeing the film Frankenstein, two young girls go searching for the doctor's monster. What's up with that? That sounds really cool.
It's so good.
I'll check it out.
The other things on my mind are Mulholland Drive, always. I've officially decided that it is Lynch's best. Eyes Wide Shut, which is the best Christmas movie, of course, and the best David Lynch movie not made by David Lynch. I think it's also the second best David Lynch movie, period, if you want to go that far, only behind Mulholland, and my favorite of Kubrick's. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, always. The Great American Movie, just the best. I saw it in a theater for Halloween because it has its 50th anniversary. And the entire filmographies of Kenji Mizoguchi and Rainer Werner Fassbinder, who I have been binging the daylights out of this year. Yeah, they rock. I mean, there's a million things more, obviously. I've just been watching a lot of Carlos Saura movies, too. But, yeah. What have you been watching?
I watched, I guess we have to talk about it a little bit, folks. Perfect Blue I finally watched. And it was excellent. It was a great recommend. I think you recommended me that, but I already knew about it. But so good. I don't even really want to spoil what it's about. Well, I don't know. It feels like it's aged incredibly well to modern times, and I related to it as well a lot.
It's very poignant. It's one of those movies. Like the credits roll at minute like 77 or 78, I think.
Yes.
Like 81 minutes total. And yeah, but it feels so much longer in a good way because it's just so full of ideas. I actually just rewatched Persona because it was in the theater, so I was like, well, of course. And that's another movie that it comes in at the 80-minute mark, but it's so full of ideas throughout the whole runtime. It feels like, even though you're in there for, not even an hour and a half, you come away with it thinking, wow, I really got a lot out of that. And Perfect Blue is like that. It's intense. It's really overwhelming at times. But like with how internet drowned we are nowadays, then it only gets more and more poignant, especially with all the weirdos out there, let's say.
I watched a Chinese movie called Not One Less. I thought it was very, very beautiful, actually. I
Not
haven't seen much
One
Chinese
Less.
cinema because, like, I think there's a bit of a stigma against Chinese cinema sometimes.
Oh, this is I don't know this movie, but I know the director. This is Zhang Yimou. He
Yeah.
made an amazing movie called Raise the Red Lantern. That's my favorite Chinese movie.
Oh yeah, I think I was gonna watch that one too.
He's spectacular. Yeah, he did like a lot of cool stuff like Hero, and Red Sorghum, I think it's called, and another one, just Judo, I think. Not like judo, but JU space DOU. It has nothing to do with the martial art, but it's but yeah, he made a lot of great movies. Wow. Okay, I'm checking this out.
Yeah, it's like this. It's this
Oh,
really
it's-
beautiful look into like this little Chinese village school and this little adventure that they went on. It's kind of slice
I'm
of life, but also it's like a peek into the realities of a harsh life back in the. I think it takes place in the 80s or 90s in China. But
I am so in. Sometimes like I'll be watching something and I'll think about it kind of goes back to the Pokemon thing where people can gaslight you into thinking that you're a psycho for thinking a certain way when it's really completely normal, because like our conception of movies is just, made in Hollywood, cost $500 million, actors I know, fun stories. And so I say this specifically because last night before going to bed, I watched a Ukrainian art documentary. It's because the director is Sergei Paranajov, and he's a genius, and I like his other stuff, which is not documentary. But this one, I mean, I'll watch anything he does because it looks incredible. But I was thinking, man, just like if I just said to a random person, I'm watching, because they're not going to know it by name, odds are. So, a Ukrainian art documentary, huh? Wow, you really are trying to get out there and like, because if this, like, you were to say to a random person, oh, I watched a Chinese period slice of life, they'd be like, yeah, huh, okay. What about, I don't know, something I've heard of? I think people are very incurious on average. You kind of have to pull teeth to get them
no,
to
it's
try
awesome
new
to
things.
see movies from different cultures get a little peek into life of somewhere you've never seen. It's like it
Of
expands your
course, of
worldview.
course,
It's
but
good, yeah.
it goes back to the Pokemon thing where people know what they have, and even if it could be, more fulfilling and enriching, they're like, you know what, I'm going to stick with what I got because I
I
know it.
suppose, yeah.
So,
True.
yeah, but no, I'm sure this is excellent. This Zhang Yimou is one of China's best. There's this really bleak Chinese movie called An Elephant Sitting Still. It's like 4 hours long. It's very slow, and it's dark.
I'll take a look at that. I'll
Uh,
add that to the list as well. An elephant sitting still.
Yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm just thinking of
wow.
Eyes Wide Shut more than most things. Eyes Wide Shut and Spirit of the Beehive are just
I watched
also
Eyes Wide
Woman in the
Shut a
Dune.
few years ago, and I found it very bizarre, but like pretty intriguing. I might be worthy
It
of a
sticks with
rewatch
you,
because
right? Like
it's I haven't. It's been a
yeah,
while.
at first you're like, what is going on? This is not one of Kubrick's best. And then you're like, but it stayed with me. And then I think that whole ball sequence in the middle is just one of the most unbelievable things ever.
Yeah, very striking imagery there.
Yeah. Yeah, I also like Woman in the Dunes is something I have been thinking about. And the guy who did last year at Marienbad did a movie called The War Is Over, which is underseen but really, really intriguing in a similar vein, kind of elusive. And if I had to pick one from my main interests this year, who are Mizoguchi and Fassbinder. From Fassbinder, it is The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant, which is brutal, like not in like a violent sense or anything, but just like emotionally, which is why I like his movies. It's just it's all set in one room, but it is one of the most cinematic things I've ever seen. It is genuinely unbelievable.
Oh, that sounds cool.
And for Mizoguchi, I don't know because he has like a million that are amazing, but I guess if I had to pick, I would go with The Crucified Lovers, which and it culminates in this sequence on the river, which is just one of the most unbelievably beautiful things I've ever seen. But like all of his movies are like that. I've seen 20 of them at this point, and like the worst one was still really good. So he just could not go wrong with anything. So yeah, that's most of what's been on my mind. Oh, and I got to rewatch Taxi Driver in theater
Oh, cool.
recently, so that was wonderful. Hilarious movie.
Yeah, I love watching classics in theaters when I get the chance. I watched Aliens. That was really cool in theater, on film. Very cool.
Alien is fantastic. Do you like it more than Alien?
I don't think so, but it's also really good. I think I prefer Alien a little bit.
I think so too, but I watched the director's cut of Aliens a few months ago, and it's a big improvement. Yeah, I try not to rewatch stuff generally unless it's in a theater now, because I'm lucky to be near a bunch of theaters that play old stuff all the time. I made an exception for Eyes Wide Shut, but I did see that in a theater last year, which was what kickstarted my obsession with it. But I just saw Throne of Blood in a theater, the Kurosawa movie, and I saw it like 4 years ago, and I remember really liking it. But wow, um, I know it's Kurosawa, and there's like 6 things at least you can make a case for as his best, and they're all unbelievable. But I think this one's my favorite. The atmosphere is just
That one's
absolutely
playing near me
ridiculous.
somewhere, and maybe I have to. I just looked it up.
Is it really?
Next month, but yeah.
You gotta see it. It's
I'll maybe add that to the calendar, possibly.
oh yeah, Kurosawa in a theater should not be missed. I didn't see Ron in a theater last year. I think I had to work or something, and I'm still upset about it. And I think in February, I already like they're showing High and Low in a theater here in February, and I already have my ticket for it because I am not missing that.
All right, another Kurosawa. I gotta watch more of his stuff for sure. There's not too much time to watch films
I have a
these
bad
days,
habit
yeah.
of saying the greatest for everything when I'm very passionate about something, but yeah, Kurosawa really is incredible. I think I'm also like 19 movies in to his filmography, and just he was really, really ridiculous. There's like him and Bergman, like of all the like classic
I love
guys that you
Bergman.
can point to as the best. Oh, he's like they're not just among the best; they're the best over and over and over and over. Like I, worship Tarkovsky, but like he only made 7 movies, and Bergman made like a million, and like not everything he made was like on the level of like Persona or Face to Face or Scenes from a Marriage or whatever, but like he has so many. Like the choice for Tarkovsky's best is generally a conversation between like usually it's like 3, right? Stalker, Mirror, Andrei Rublev. Of course, there are arguments for. I like Nostalgia the most personally, and The Sacrifice is insane. And Ivan's Childhood. Oh, I guess I forgot to put Solaris in there, so it's between 4, right? But with like Bergman and Kurosawa, it's between like 8 each. So and even like their non all-time great stuff is still unbelievably good. Like I don't know, like the best director ever question is nuts. But that's another reason why I'm so crazy about Mizoguchi and Fassbinder, because they also just were so insane and they did it so much. Not to say that the Kubrick Tarkovsky approach of really limiting your selection is bad either, because those guys, when they made something, it was really insane. Or someone like Chantal Ackerman, like she made a lot of stuff, but it was so different too, because she also made a lot of documentaries. But her style and her narrative stuff is like really carries over. She made this amazing thing called From the East, which I watched this year, and like I'm not crazy about documentaries. I like a good one. I like American Movie, for instance. and I like some experimental documentaries, which is how you know I've gone too far. There's this great Japanese one called AKA Serial Killer, which I really, really loved. And but basically, when you watch a documentary, then most of the time, not that there aren't great documentaries, but on average, I prefer the narrative film because the documentaries are more content to be simplistic in a lot of cases. But a great documentary is just as great as a great film, and that's what Chantal Akerman does. Um, and that's why I'm so crazy. I mean, Chantal Akerman is another one of those directors where everything she does, I just go crazy for, and she made so much stuff. And I still have a couple things to track down, but I'm also like 20 plus into her filmography, and she was fearless. She did not care what anyone thought, and just, I mean, to make Jean Dielman at any age is utterly insane. But yeah, she rocks. And if you don't want to sit through 3.5 hours of extreme slowness, then you could start with The Meetings of Anna, which is very similar but moves at a pace more like, let's say, Antonioni. It's not quite as slow. Or no, it's not nearly as slow, but you
And
get what I'm
perhaps I
saying.
will. There you go, folks. Some film recommendations from BKC and a couple from me as well. Lest we go on for 3 more hours, I think we should cut it there. But I
Yeah,
will say,
I gotta eat. I'm hungry.
if you end up watching Nosferatu, which is coming out soon in Australia, I would like to.
I will.
I would love to chat about that with you
I'm gonna
if
see
you're
a
down.
double feature. No, I'm very excited for Nosferatu. Because I really love the original, and there are a bunch of theaters here doing a double feature. So
Oh, cool.
hell
Cool.
yeah,
I haven't seen the original. Maybe I'll watch it.
It's really good. It's well worth seeking out. Like I genuinely like the silent movie era. And Nosferatu is one of the best.
I will check that out then. Well, thank you for your time,
Yeah,
as always.
my pleasure.